She stood before the most dangerous man in the city with trembling hands and an impossible request: pretend to be her date, just for one night. What she didn't know was that accepting his terms would cost her everything she'd ever been, and give her everything she never knew she wanted. A broken woman walks into a lion's den with nothing but pride and a grandmother's ring. A crime lord sees something in her tears he's never felt before. One fake arrangement, one night that changes two lives forever. Will you follow this journey to the end? Hit that like button and comment your city, so I can see how far this story travels. The Velvet Room didn't welcome just anyone. Tucked 3 floors below street level in the financial district, behind an unmarked steel door and a security detail that could smell desperation from a block away, it catered exclusively to people who made the kind of money that didn't show up on tax returns. The air smelled like aged bourbon and decisions that could end careers or lives. Leather booths lined the walls, each one dimly lit by amber sconces that cast more shadow than light. At this hour, near midnight on a Thursday, the place hummed with quiet conversation and the occasional clink of crystal. Adrian Vance sat alone in the corner booth, exactly where he always sat when he came here, which wasn't often. He didn't need to be seen to be known. Everyone in this room knew who he was, even if they'd never met him, especially if they'd never met him. He was 34 but looked older in certain lights, not from age, but from the weight of things he carried that had nothing to do with years. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair swept back from a face that could have belonged to a banker or a soldier, depending on how he held his jaw. Tonight, he wore a black suit tailored so precisely it might as well have been drawn onto him. No tie. First 2 buttons undone. A watch on his wrist worth more than most people's cars. But it wasn't the clothes or the looks that made people nervous. It was the stillness. Adrian Vance didn't fidget. Didn't check his phone every 30 seconds like the anxious money men 2 booths over. Didn't flag down waitstaff or glance around the room searching for validation. He simply existed in his space like a piece of the architecture, immovable, certain, patient in a way that suggested he'd already won whatever game you thought you were playing. He lifted his glass, Macallan 25 neat, and took a slow sip, letting the burn settle into his chest. Across from him sat Marcus Chen, one of his senior captains, a wiry man in his 40s with silver threading through his black hair and the kind of face that revealed nothing. They'd been discussing a shipment issue. Routine. Boring, really. Vincent's crew picked it up this morning, Marcus was saying, his voice low. No problems at the dock. It's already in the warehouse on 5th. Adrian nodded once. The count? Matches the manifest. Every unit. Good. You want me to move it tomorrow night or wait until... Marcus stopped mid-sentence. Adrian didn't turn his head, but he caught it too, the shift in the room's energy. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but they stuttered. A woman had just walked in. No, walked wasn't the right word, stumbled was closer. She stood just inside the entrance, lit from behind by the hallway's harsh fluorescence, looking like someone who'd taken a wrong turn somewhere and ended up in a place they absolutely did not belong. Mid-20s, maybe. Pale skin flushed pink at the cheeks, dark blonde hair falling in limp waves around her shoulders, like she'd put it up hours ago and it had since given up. She wore a bridesmaid dress, champagne-colored satin, tea-length, with delicate straps that kept slipping off one shoulder. And she was crying. Not the loud, dramatic kind of crying. The quiet, devastating kind. The kind that came after you'd already screamed yourself empty and all that was left was the slow leak of everything you'd been trying to hold in. She clutched a small beaded purse in both hands like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The security guy at the door, big, bald, ex-military, leaned in and said something to her, probably telling her she couldn't be here. She shook her head, said something back. He frowned, glanced toward the bar as if looking for backup. Adrian watched. He shouldn't have. There were 1,000 reasons not to pay attention to some weeping girl who'd clearly wandered into the wrong venue. But something about the way she held herself, spine straight even as her hand shook, chin lifted even as tears streamed down her face, made him pause. She wasn't asking for help. She was demanding it. The bouncer stepped aside. Maybe he saw it too. Maybe he just didn't get paid enough to manhandle crying women in formal wear. Either way, she walked past him, heels clicking unevenly on the polished concrete floor, and began moving through the room. Heads turned. Not many. The Velvet Room's clientele prided themselves on discretion. But enough. Adrian set his glass down. "Boss?" Marcus said quietly. "Wait." She was scanning the booths now, eyes red-rimmed and wild, searching for something or someone. Her gaze passed over the first few tables, a trio of venture capitalists pretending not to notice her, a couple in the middle of what looked like a very expensive breakup, a lone man in a gray suit nursing whiskey like it was medicine, and then her eyes landed on Adrian. She stopped walking. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the dim room. He couldn't read her expression, fear, desperation, determination, all three maybe. But whatever she saw in him made her decision. She started walking again, straight toward him. Marcus tensed. "You want me to—" "No." She reached the booth and stood there, swaying slightly, like the last 20 feet had taken everything she had. Up close, Adrian could see the smudged mascara, the uneven breathing, the way her knuckles had gone white around her purse. "Are you Adrian Vance?" Her voice came out hoarse, like she'd been crying for hours. He didn't answer right away, just studied her. She smelled like champagne and jasmine perfume and something else. Salt, maybe, from dried tears. "Who's asking?" he said finally. "Someone who needs your help." Marcus shifted in his seat, clearly ready to intervene, but Adrian held up one finger. "Not yet." "Do I know you?" "No?" "Then how do you know me?" She blinked, and a fresh tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "Everyone knows you. At least, everyone who needs to." "Interesting. You got a name?" "Clara." She swallowed hard. "Clara Whitmore." The name meant nothing to him. He glanced at Marcus, who gave a barely perceptible shake of his head. Not in the database. Not connected to any families they knew. Nobody. Adrian leaned back against the leather booth, draping one arm across the backrest. "Okay, Clara Whitmore. You walked into a private club, past security, crying in a bridesmaid dress, looking for me specifically, so either you're very brave or very stupid." "Both, probably," she whispered. Despite himself, Adrian almost smiled. Almost. "What do you want?" Clara took a shaky breath, and for a second he thought she might lose her nerve. But then she squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, and said the most absurd thing he'd heard in months. "I need you to be my date." Silence. Not just from Adrian, but from Marcus too, who looked like he'd just witnessed someone walk up to a sleeping bear and poke it with a stick. Adrian waited. Clara seemed to realize how insane that sounded, because she rushed forward with the rest of it, words tumbling out faster now. "Not a real date. I mean, just pretend, just for one night. There's a wedding, my ex-fiancé's wedding. It's in 2 weeks and I can't show up alone. I can't. Everyone will know. They'll all be there. His family, my family, people from work, and they all know what he did. They all know he left me at the altar 3 months ago, and if I show up alone, they'll look at me like I'm... She stopped, pressing a hand to her mouth, trying to hold it together. Adrian didn't move, didn't speak. After a moment, she lowered her hand and forced herself to continue. "I know how this sounds. I know you don't know me. I know this is crazy, but I don't have anyone else to ask. Everyone I know is connected to him somehow, or they're too afraid to go against his family, or they just pity me, and I can't stand it anymore." "Why me?" "Because you're the kind of man nobody questions," she said quietly. "Because if I walk in with you, nobody will dare say a word. Because you're powerful and dangerous and completely untouchable, and for one night, I need to be all of those things too." Smart girl, crazy, but smart. Adrian picked up his glass, swirled the amber liquid, and took another slow sip. He let the silence stretch out, watching her squirm, watching her fight to keep standing there under his gaze. Finally, he set the glass down. "What's your ex-fiancé's name?" "Daniel Harrington." That name Adrian knew, not personally, but the Harrington family. Old money, real estate empire, the kind of people who threw charity galas and got their names engraved on hospital wings. They operated in adjacent circles, legitimate wealth built on 3 generations of strategic marriages and offshore accounts. Clean on the surface, dirty underneath, like everyone else. "Daniel Harrington," Adrian repeated, almost amused now. "The trust fund prince." Clara's jaw tightened. "Yes." "And he left you at the altar." Yes. In front of everyone. She didn't answer, but the fresh tears said enough. Adrian leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, and looked at her directly. Let me make sure I understand. You want me, a man you've never met, who runs half the illegal operations in this city, to put on a suit, smile pretty, and play boyfriend at some country club wedding so you can make your ex-fiancé jealous? Not jealous, Clara said, and there was steel in her voice now. I want him to see that I'm fine, that I moved on, that he didn't break me. But he did break you, Adrian said simply. That's why you're here. She flinched like he'd slapped her. He almost felt bad. Almost. But Adrian Vance didn't deal in sentiment. He dealt in leverage and angles and what people were willing to pay for the things they wanted. And this girl, this strange, desperate, trembling girl, wanted something badly enough to walk into the lion's den wearing a bridesmaid dress and mascara stains. What are you offering in return? He asked. Clara's hands fumbled with her purse. She opened it, dug around inside, and pulled out a small velvet box. She set it on the table between them and flipped it open. Inside was a ring, not an engagement ring, something older. A thin gold band with a small sapphire surrounded by tiny seed pearls. Antique, probably. Worth maybe a few $1,000s if you found the right buyer. It was my grandmother's, Clara said quietly. It's all I have left of her. It's not much, I know, but I don't have money or connections or anything else you'd want. I just have this. Adrian looked at the ring, then at her. I'm not a charity, Clara. I know. I don't do favors. I know. So why the hell would I say yes to this? She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were clearer, steadier. Like she'd made some kind of decision in the space between breaths. Because you're curious, she said. Because in your world, people are predictable. They want money or power or protection. But I'm asking for something you can't buy. I'm asking you to pretend to be something you're not, with someone you don't know, for reasons that don't benefit you at all. And I think part of you wants to know what that feels like. Damn. Marcus coughed quietly, which was his way of saying, this is a bad idea, boss. But Adrian ignored him. He picked up the ring box, turned it over in his hands, studied the way the light caught the sapphire. It was a beautiful piece, the kind of thing someone's grandmother wore every day for 50 years until it became part of her skin. And Clara was willing to give it to him. For one night. For a lie. 2 weeks, you said? Yes. And it's just one event? The wedding? The wedding and the reception. Maybe 6 hours total. Adrian closed the box and set it down. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, and saw past the tears and the desperation to the person underneath. Someone who'd been humiliated, abandoned, left standing in front of everyone she knew, holding a bouquet and a broken promise. Someone who hadn't curled up and disappeared. Someone who walked into a place like this, found the most dangerous man in the room, and asked him to help her lie. He respected that. Sit down, he said. Clara blinked. What? Sit. She hesitated, then slid into the booth across from him, movement stiff and uncertain. Marcus gave Adrian a look that said, "Are you serious right now?" but shifted over to make room. Adrian poured a glass of water from the carafe on the table and slid it toward her. Drink. She did, hands shaking so badly she almost spilled it. When she set the glass down, Adrian leaned back and crossed his arms. If I do this, and I'm not saying I will, it's not just about showing up and holding your hand. If you walk into that wedding with me, people are going to ask questions. They're going to want to know who I am, how we met, how long we've been together. And if you freeze up or stumble or look like you're lying, the whole thing falls apart. I can handle it, Clara said quickly. Can you? Yes. You sure? Because right now you look like you're about 2 seconds away from passing out. She straightened her spine, forced her hands still. I'll be fine. Adrian watched her for a long moment. Then he picked up the ring box again, turned it over once more, and made his decision. Here's the deal, he said. I'll do it. I'll be your date. I'll play the part. Make it believable. Make sure your ex and everyone else at that wedding knows you're not someone to pity. Clara's face lit up with something close to hope. Really? But, Adrian continued, if I'm going to do this, we're doing it right. You're going to spend the next 2 weeks with me. The hope flickered. What? You heard me. You're not walking into that wedding on my arm, looking like someone I picked up off the street. If people are going to believe we're together, you need to look like you belong in my world. That means new clothes, new hair, new everything. It means learning how to walk into a room and own it. How to talk to people who could buy and sell you 10 times over without blinking. How to carry yourself like someone who doesn't flinch when things get ugly. Clara stared at him. You're serious. Dead serious. You want me to pretend to be your boyfriend? Fine. But you're going to pretend to be the kind of woman who could date someone like me. And that takes work. I have a job at... Take time off. I can't just... Then we don't have a deal. She closed her mouth, opened it again, closed it. Adrian waited. He could see her mind working, weighing options, calculating costs. This was the moment where most people backed out, where they realized what they were actually asking for and decided the price was too high. But Clara Whitmore wasn't most people. Okay, she said finally. Okay, 2 weeks. I'll do whatever you say. Adrian smiled. Not the warm kind, the kind that made people nervous. Then we have a deal. He extended his hand across the table. Clara looked at it for a moment. At the long fingers, the calluses, the faint scar across his knuckles that suggested he'd broken that hand on someone's face at least once. Then she reached out and shook it. Her grip was stronger than he expected. One more thing, Adrian said, still holding her hand. If you're going to be in my world, even for 2 weeks, you need to understand the rules. You don't ask questions about my business. You don't talk about what you see or hear. You don't tell anyone, and I mean anyone, about this arrangement. As far as the world is concerned, we're together, really together. You break that story. You break our deal. I understand. Do you? Yes. He released her hand and leaned back. Good. We start tomorrow. Be at this address at 9 a.m. He pulled a card from his jacket pocket. Plain black, no name, just an address embossed in silver, and slid it across the table. Clara picked it up, turned it over. What is this? My place. Don't be late. She nodded, tucking the card into her purse along with the now empty ring box. Adrian had kept the ring. She didn't ask for it back. Smart. She stood, smoothing down her dress, looking suddenly exhausted. Thank you, she said quietly. I know this is insane, and I know you didn't have to say yes, but thank you. Adrian didn't respond, just watched as she turned and walked back toward the exit, heels clicking against the floor, shoulders squared despite everything. The room watched her go. When the door closed behind her, Marcus let out a long breath. Boss? Yeah. What the hell was that? Adrian picked up his glass and drained the rest of his whiskey in one swallow. Honestly, I have no idea. You're really gonna do this? Play house with some random girl because her ex dumped her? Looks like it. Why? Adrian set the glass down and turned the ring box over in his hands one more time before slipping it into his pocket. Because she walked into a room full of predators and asked the biggest one for help, he said. And I want to see what happens when someone like that stops being afraid. Marcus shook his head. You're going soft. Maybe. This is a bad idea. Probably. She could be setting you up, could be working for someone. She's not. How do you know? Adrian stood, buttoning his jacket. Because if she was smart enough to set me up, she wouldn't have been crying. The apartment was too quiet. Clara stood in the middle of her tiny studio, still wearing the bridesmaid dress, staring at nothing. The adrenaline that had carried her through the last hour was gone now, leaving behind a hollow ache and the creeping realization of what she'd just done. She'd walked into the Velvet Room, a place she'd only heard about in whispers, a place where people like her didn't go, and made a deal with Adrian Vance. Adrian Vance. She sank onto the edge of her bed and pressed her hands to her face. What the hell was she thinking? Except she knew exactly what she was thinking. She was thinking about Daniel's smug face when he told her 3 days before their wedding that he'd fallen in love with someone else, someone better, someone from his world. She was thinking about standing in her wedding dress in an empty church while 200 guests whispered and stared. She was thinking about her mother's pitying looks and her father's quiet disappointment and her coworkers' careful, too kind questions. She was thinking about how badly she needed to stop being the girl everyone felt sorry for. And Adrian Vance, dangerous, powerful, completely untouchable Adrian Vance, was her way out, or her way to an even worse place. Hard to say. Clara pulled off her heels and tossed them into the corner, then stood and unzipped the dress, letting it pool on the floor. She stepped out of it and kicked it away, not caring where it landed. She'd worn it to her best friend's wedding tonight. Her best friend, who was marrying Daniel's younger brother. The same best friend who'd begged her to come, promised it wouldn't be awkward, sworn that Daniel wouldn't even be there. Daniel had been there, with his new fiancé, a brunette in a designer dress who looked at Clara like she was a stain on the carpet. That was when Clara had left, walked out of the reception, gotten into her car, and driven until she found herself parked outside the Velvet Room. She'd sat there for 20 minutes, crying and angry and so tired of feeling small, before she'd finally worked up the nerve to go inside. She pulled on sweatpants and an old t-shirt, then collapsed onto her bed. Her phone buzzed. She almost ignored it. But then she saw the name on the screen, Mom, and guilt made her answer. "Hey, Clara, honey, where did you go? Sarah said you left early." "I wasn't feeling well." A pause. Her mother's voice softened. "Did you see him?" Clara closed her eyes. "Yeah." "Oh, sweetheart. I'm fine, Mom." "You don't sound fine." "Well, I am. I just need to sleep." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "You know, it's okay if you're not fine. It's okay to still be hurt. He broke your heart, Clara. You don't have to pretend, 'I have to go. I'll call you tomorrow.'" "Clara." She hung up. She knew her mother meant well. Everyone meant well. But their kindness felt like pity, and their pity felt like proof that she was exactly what Daniel said she was. Forgettable, replaceable, not enough. Clara stared at the ceiling. 2 weeks. She had 2 weeks to become someone different, someone who didn't flinch, someone who belonged on the arm of a man like Adrian Vance. She had no idea how she was going to pull that off, but she'd find out tomorrow at 9 a.m. Adrian's penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a glass tower overlooking the river. Clara stood in the lobby the next morning, clutching a coffee she'd barely touched, staring at the elevator panel like it might bite her. She was early, 8:45. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Adrian's face, cold, calculating, curious, and wondered if she'd made a deal with someone who was going to destroy her in ways Daniel never could. But she was here. That had to count for something. The elevator doors opened, and a man stepped out. Not Adrian, someone older, Asian, wearing an expensive suit and an expression that gave away nothing. "Miss Whitmore?" Clara nodded. "I'm Marcus Chen. Mr. Vance is expecting you." He gestured toward the elevator. Clara followed him inside, and he pressed the button for the top floor. The doors closed, and they rose in silence. When the elevator opened again, Clara stepped into a space that didn't look like any apartment she'd ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows lined the far wall, flooding the room with morning light. The furniture was minimal, sleek leather, dark wood, metal accents. No photographs. No personal touches. Just clean lines and expensive taste, and the kind of space that felt more like a statement than a home. Adrian stood by the windows, hands in his pockets, looking out over the city. He didn't turn around when she entered. "You're early," he said. "I didn't want to be late." "Good." He turned then, and Clara got her first real look at him in daylight. Last night he'd been all shadows and amber light, more feeling than form. But now, in the harsh clarity of morning, she could see him clearly. The sharp jaw, the dark eyes that missed nothing, the controlled power in the way he held himself. He was wearing black again. Jeans this time, and a fitted t-shirt that showed off arms that clearly saw regular gym time. Casual, but still somehow intimidating. "You look tired," he said. "I didn't sleep much." "Second thoughts?" Clara lifted her chin. "No." Adrian smiled slightly. "Liar. But we'll work on that." He crossed the room toward her, and Clara had to fight the urge to step back. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something clean and sharp, like cedar and smoke. "Here's how this is going to work," he said. "For the next 2 weeks, your job is to learn. I'm going to teach you how to exist in my world, how to talk, how to move, how to make people believe you belong. Some of it's going to feel stupid, some of it's going to be uncomfortable, but if you want this to work, you do exactly what I say. Understood?" "Yes." "Yes what?" Clara blinked. Yes, sir? Adrian, we're supposed to be dating. You don't call your boyfriend sir. Right, sorry. Yes, Adrian. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Better. Now, first lesson. Posture. My posture's fine. No, it's not. You're hunched, shoulders forward, head down, like you're trying to take up less space. Stop it. Clara straightened automatically. Better. But you're still tense. Relax. I am relaxed. You're not. Your jaw's tight, your hands are clenched, and you look like you're about to bolt for the door any second. If you walk into that wedding looking like a scared rabbit, no one's going to believe you're with me. Clara forced her hands to unclench. This is harder than I thought. Most things are. Adrian circled her slowly, like a predator sizing up prey. Confidence isn't about being perfect. It's about acting like you have every right to be wherever you are. You don't apologize for taking up space. You don't shrink when people look at you. You meet their eyes, and you hold it until they look away first. That sounds exhausting. It is, but it works. He stopped in front of her again. Look at me. Clara raised her eyes. No, really look. Don't glance and look away. Hold it. She did, and it was harder than it should have been. Adrian's gaze was intense, unflinching, the kind of stare that felt like it could see straight through you to all the parts you tried to hide. After a few seconds, Clara's instinct screamed at her to look down. She didn't. 10 seconds. 15. Her heart was pounding, but she didn't blink. Finally, Adrian smiled, a real one this time, small but genuine. Good. That's progress. Clara exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath. We're going out, Adrian said, walking toward the door. Out? Where? Shopping. If you're going to look like you belong with me, you need clothes that don't come from a department store clearance rack. Clara glanced down at her jeans and sweater. What's wrong with what I'm wearing? Adrian just looked at her. Right, she muttered. Stupid question. The next 4 hours were a blur of boutiques Clara had only ever walked past, never into. Adrian moved through them like he owned the place, which, for all she knew, maybe he did. He pointed at dresses, shoes, accessories, and salespeople appeared with options before he'd even finished speaking. Clara tried on what felt like 100 different outfits. Adrian sat in a leather chair, scrolling through his phone with one hand, barely looking up as she modeled each one. No. No. Maybe. Try the black one. Absolutely not. It was humiliating and empowering at the same time. Every no stung a little, but every yes felt like passing some kind of test she hadn't known she was taking. By the time they left the last store, Clara had 6 bags full of clothes she couldn't have afforded in a year of saving. Adrian handed his credit card over without even asking the total. I can't let you pay for all this, Clara said as they walked back to his car. You don't have a choice. You think I'm walking into that wedding with someone wearing last season's Target? I wasn't wearing... She stopped. Okay, maybe I was. Adrian opened the passenger door for her, a surprisingly gentlemanly gesture that caught her off guard. She slid in, and he closed the door before walking around to the driver's side. The car was exactly what she'd expected. Black, sleek, expensive, something German, with an engine that purred like a threat. They drove in silence for a while before Clara finally worked up the nerve to ask the question that had been gnawing at her all morning. Why are you really doing this? Adrian didn't look at her. I told you, I'm curious. That's not a real answer. It's the only one you're getting. Clara turned to look out the window. You know, for someone who's supposed to be pretending to like me, you're not very nice. I never said I'd be nice. I said I'd be convincing. And that doesn't require being nice? Not in my experience. She didn't have a response to that. They pulled up in front of a building Clara didn't recognize, modern, glass, with a discreet sign that read Meridian Fitness. Adrian parked and got out. Clara followed. What are we doing here? Next lesson. Inside, the gym was nothing like the crowded, fluorescent-lit places Clara had seen before. This was all dark wood and mood lighting, private training rooms and equipment that looked like it cost more than her car. Adrian led her to a room in the back where a woman was waiting, tall, black, probably in her early 40s, with the kind of body that came from years of disciplined training. Clara, this is Jordan, Adrian said. Jordan, Clara, you've got her for an hour. Teach her how to walk. Clara blinked. I already know how to walk. Jordan smiled, but it wasn't warm. No, honey. You know how to move from point A to point B. I'm going to teach you how to walk. Adrian left without another word. The next hour was brutal. Jordan made Clara walk back and forth across the room in heels, the 4-inch stilettos Adrian had bought that morning, while critiquing everything from her hip movement to her arm swing to the angle of her chin. You're walking like you're apologizing for existing, Jordan said. Stop. Plant your feet. Own the floor. I'm trying. Try harder. When you walk into a room, you're not asking permission to be there. You're announcing it. Every step says, I belong here. Every step says, you're lucky I showed up. Again. Clara walked, fell, walked again. By the end of the hour, her feet were screaming and her legs felt like jelly, but something had shifted. She could feel it. The way her spine straightened, the way her shoulders pulled back, the way her steps landed with purpose instead of hesitation. Jordan nodded approvingly. Better. You've got potential. Same time tomorrow? Clara wanted to say no, wanted to collapse on the floor and never wear heels again. Instead, she said, yes. That became the rhythm of the next 2 weeks. Mornings with Jordan, learning how to walk, how to stand, how to command space with nothing but posture and presence. Afternoons with Adrian, learning how to talk to people who had more money than sense, how to dodge invasive questions without seeming rude, how to smile in a way that looked genuine but revealed nothing. Evenings at Adrian's penthouse, going over their cover story until Clara could recite it in her sleep. They'd met at a gallery opening 6 months ago. He'd approached her. She'd been charmed despite herself. They'd kept it quiet because of his work, because of her need for privacy after Daniel, but now they were ready to go public, simple, believable, a good lie. Adrian drilled her relentlessly. Where was the gallery? Downtown, the Morrison. What exhibit? Contemporary photography, some artist from Berlin whose name I can't pronounce. Try. Richter, I think. You think or you know? I know. What did I say to you when I approached? You told me I was standing in front of your favorite piece and asked if I'd move. And what did you say? I told you to buy your own museum if you wanted a private viewing. Adrian almost smiled. And then? You laughed. Said you liked women who didn't flinch. Good. It went on like that, over and over, until the story felt like memory. But it wasn't just rehearsal. Adrian took her places. Restaurants where the waitstaff knew him by name. Private clubs where the doors opened before he even knocked. A boxing match in a warehouse where the crowd was more dangerous than the fighters. He introduced her to people as his girlfriend, and Clara learned to smile and nod and say just enough to seem interested without revealing she had no idea who anyone was. She met Marcus again, several times. He watched her with the kind of suspicion reserved for people who didn't belong, but he never said anything, just hovered at Adrian's side like a shadow with opinions. And slowly, almost without realizing it, Clara started to change. Not just the way she walked or talked, something deeper. She stopped flinching when Adrian touched her, his hand on her lower back as they entered a room, his fingers laced with hers at dinner. She stopped second-guessing every word before it left her mouth. She stopped shrinking. One night, 8 days in, they were at a restaurant downtown, some French place with food Clara couldn't pronounce, and wine that probably cost more than her rent. Adrian had his arm around the back of her chair, and they were deep in conversation with one of his business associates, a man named Dimitri, who had the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. So how did Adrian convince you to put up with him? Dimitri asked, his accent thick and vaguely Eastern European. Clara didn't miss a beat. He didn't convince me. I convinced him. Dimitri laughed. Is that right? Absolutely. He thought he was too busy for a relationship. I told him he was just scared. Adrian raised an eyebrow, amused. Did you? I did. Clara turned to him, and the look she gave him was so natural, so easy, she almost forgot it was fake. You're welcome, by the way. Dimitri roared with laughter. I like her, Adrian. Don't screw this up. Later, in the car, on the way back to the penthouse, Adrian glanced at her. That was good? What was? The way you handled Dimitri. You didn't freeze, Didn't hesitate. You played it perfectly. Clara shrugged. I'm learning from the best, right? Apparently. They drove in silence for a while before Clara spoke again, quieter this time. Can I ask you something? Depends. What you do? Your business. Is it really as bad as people say? Adrian's jaw tightened. What do people say? That you're dangerous. That you hurt people. That you run things no one's supposed to talk about. And you want to know if it's true. Yes. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, emotionless. I do what I need to do to survive in a world that doesn't forgive weakness. Sometimes that means making hard choices. Sometimes it means doing things that would make people like you uncomfortable. But I don't apologize for it, and I don't explain it to people who wouldn't understand anyway. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. Clara looked out the window. She should have been scared. Should have insisted he take her home, called off the deal, walked away. But she didn't, because somewhere in the last 8 days, she'd stopped seeing Adrian as just a means to an end. She'd started seeing him as a person, complicated, damaged, careful in ways that suggested he'd been hurt before, and refused to let it happen again. She understood that. Maybe too well. The night before the wedding, Adrian called her to the penthouse one last time. When Clara arrived, he was standing by the windows again, silhouetted against the city lights. He turned when she walked in, and she noticed he was holding a glass of whiskey. Drink? He offered. Sure. He poured her one, 2 fingers, neat, and handed it to her. Clara took a sip and tried not to grimace. She still wasn't used to the burn. Tomorrow's the day, Adrian said. Yeah. You ready? Clara thought about it. 2 weeks ago, she would have said no. Would have panicked, second-guessed, maybe even backed out at the last minute. But now? Yes, she said, and meant it. Adrian studied her, and something shifted in his expression. You've changed. Is that a good thing? I don't know yet. He set his glass down and crossed the room toward her. Clara's heart kicked up, but she didn't step back, didn't look away. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him, and reached up to brush a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was so gentle, it caught her completely off guard. One more thing, he said quietly. What? If we're going to sell this tomorrow, people need to believe we're really together. And that means they need to see. He trailed off, his gaze dropping to her lips. Oh. Clara's breath caught. You want to practice? She said. If you're comfortable. She should say no. Should keep this professional. Keep the lines clear. Remember this was all fake. But she didn't want to. Okay, she whispered. Adrian leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. When his lips met hers, it wasn't rushed or forceful. It was careful, controlled. The kind of kiss that tasted like expensive whiskey and bad decisions, and something Clara couldn't quite name. She kissed him back. For a moment, the world narrowed to just that. His mouth on hers, his hand cradling her face, the slow burn of something that felt nothing like pretend. When he pulled back, they were both breathing harder. That should work, Adrian said, his voice rougher than before. Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. He stepped back, putting distance between them, and picked up his glass again. Go home. Get some sleep. I'll pick you up tomorrow at 4. Adrian, good night, Clara. It was a dismissal, clear and final. Clara left without arguing, but as she rode the elevator down, her lips still tingling, one thought kept circling through her mind. What the hell am I doing? She didn't have an answer, and tomorrow she'd have to face Daniel, his new fiancé, and 200 guests who thought they knew exactly who she was, with Adrian Vance at her side. This was either the best decision she'd ever made, or the worst. Clara woke up at 6 in the morning, even though she didn't need to be ready until 4. Sleep had been impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's face, heard the whispers from 3 months ago, felt the crushing weight of 200 pairs of eyes watching her stand alone in a church that should have been full of joy. And then she'd think about Adrian's kiss, and her stomach would twist into something that felt nothing like nervousness and everything like danger. She gave up on sleep around 7 and spent the next hour pacing her apartment in an old tank top and shorts, drinking coffee she didn't taste, trying to convince herself this was still a good idea. Her phone buzzed at 8:30. A text from an unknown number. "Stop overthinking. See you at 4." Clara stared at it. How did he even know she was overthinking? She typed back, "I'm not overthinking." 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, "Liar. Eat something. You'll need the energy." She almost smiled despite herself. The rest of the morning crawled by in slow motion. Clara showered, dried her hair, stared at the dress hanging on her closet door. Adrian had sent it over 2 days ago, along with shoes, jewelry, and a note that simply said, "Wear this." Nothing else. The dress was deep emerald green, silk that looked like liquid, cut in a way that would hug every curve she had and probably a few she didn't know existed. It was the kind of dress that cost more than her monthly rent. The kind of dress that made a statement before you even opened your mouth. She'd tried it on once, alone in her apartment, and barely recognized the woman staring back at her in the mirror. At 3 o'clock, Clara started getting ready. Hair first. She'd learned how to do it herself over the past 2 weeks, the way Jordan had shown her, sleek and pulled back with a few loose pieces framing her face. Makeup next. Subtle, but precise. Emphasizing her eyes, making her lips look fuller than they were. And then the dress. She slipped into it carefully, zipped it up, stepped into the heels that added 4 inches and made her legs look endless. When she looked in the mirror this time, she didn't see the girl Daniel had left at the altar. She saw someone else entirely, someone who belonged on Adrian Vance's arm. Her phone buzzed again at 3:50. Downstairs. Clara grabbed the small clutch Adrian had sent, emerald to match the dress, and took one last look around her apartment. It felt like saying goodbye to something, though she couldn't quite name what. Then she locked the door and headed down. Adrian was leaning against his car when she stepped outside, and for a second Clara forgot how to breathe. He wore a charcoal suit tailored so perfectly it looked like it had been designed specifically for his body. Black shirt underneath, no tie, first button undone. Hair swept back, watch glinting in the afternoon sun. He looked up when he heard her heels on the pavement, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or appreciation. It was gone before she could read it properly. "You clean up well," he said. "So do you." He opened the passenger door for her without another word. Clara slid in, and he closed it gently before walking around to the driver's side. They pulled away from the curb, and the city blurred past the windows. Neither of them spoke for the first 10 minutes. The silence felt heavy, loaded with things neither wanted to say out loud. Finally, Adrian broke it. "You remember the story?" "Yes." "All of it?" "We met at the Morrison Gallery 6 months ago. You approached me. I told you to buy your own museum. You laughed. We've been together ever since, but kept it quiet because of your work and my need for privacy after Daniel." "Good. And if someone asks about my work? You're a private investor. You don't like talking business at social events. And if they push?" I smile and change the subject. Adrian glanced at her. "What if someone recognizes me, knows what I really do?" Clara had thought about this. "Then I act like I don't know what they're talking about. Like I believe everything you've told me and they're just being rude." "Smart. I've had a good teacher." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. They drove for another 20 minutes before the venue came into view. A sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city, all manicured lawns and old money architecture. The kind of place that had been hosting weddings for 100 years and would probably host them for 100 more. Claire's chest tightened. "Breathe," Adrian said quietly. "I am breathing." "No, you're panicking. There's a difference." He was right. Her hands were clenched in her lap, her breathing shallow and quick. "Look at me," Adrian said. She did. "You're not the same person who got left at the altar 3 months ago. You're not the girl who walked into the velvet room crying in a bridesmaid dress. You're someone else now. Someone stronger. Someone who doesn't flinch. So when you walk in there, you walk in like you own the place. Got it?" Clara nodded, throat tight. Adrian reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. His grip was warm, steady, anchoring. "I've got you. They won't touch you." She believed him. They pulled up to the valet station, and a young guy in a vest hurried over to open Clara's door. She stepped out, wobbled slightly on her heels, then caught herself. Muscle memory from 2 weeks of Jordan's brutal training kicked in. Spine straight, shoulders back, chin up. Adrian appeared at her side, offering his arm. Clara took it, and they walked toward the entrance together. The estate's main hall had been transformed into something out of a magazine spread. White flowers everywhere, crystal chandeliers catching the late afternoon light, tables draped in ivory linens with gold accents. It was beautiful in that sterile, expensive way that felt more like a museum than a celebration. People were already milling around the cocktail hour space. Men in suits, women in designer dresses, everyone holding champagne flutes and smiling those tight, performative smiles that came standard at events like this. The moment Claire and Adrian walked in, conversation stuttered. It wasn't subtle. Heads turned, eyes widened, whispers started immediately. Clara felt every single gaze like a physical touch, but she didn't let it show. She kept her chin up, her grip on Adrian's arm light and confident, her expression pleasant but unreadable. Adrian guided her deeper into the room with the kind of ease that suggested he walked into hostile territory every day. Which, Clara supposed, he probably did. "Smile," he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. "You're having a wonderful time." Clara smiled, and then she heard it, a familiar voice, sharp with surprise. "Clara?" She turned. Her mother stood 10 feet away, champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips, staring at Clara like she'd just seen a ghost. Beside her was Clara's father, equally stunned, and her younger sister Emma, whose mouth had actually fallen open. Clara's stomach dropped, but she forced herself to stay calm. She'd known they'd be here. Of course they'd be here. Her mother was friends with Daniel's mother, had been for years. That was how Clara and Daniel had met in the first place. But knowing and seeing were two very different things. "Hi, Mom," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. Her mother blinked, then seemed to remember herself. She set down her glass and crossed the space between them in 4 quick steps. "Sweetheart, I didn't know you were coming. You said, when I asked last week, you said—" "I changed my mind," Clara said simply. Her mother's gaze slid to Adrian, and Clara watched her brain try to process what she was seeing. Adrian Vance, because surely even Clara's mother had heard the name, had seen his face in the society pages or whispered about at fundraisers, standing beside her daughter, touching her daughter, looking at her daughter like she belonged to him. "Mom, this is Adrian," Clara said, her voice calm. "Adrian, this is my mother, Patricia, my father, Robert, and my sister Emma." Adrian extended his hand to her father first. "Robert, good to meet you." Her father shook it automatically, still looking dazed. "Likewise." Then her mother, whose handshake was limp with shock. "Patricia." "I've heard a lot about you," Adrian said smoothly. "All good things." That was a lie. Clara had barely mentioned her family, but it sounded right, and her mother seemed to accept it. Emma, meanwhile, was staring at Adrian with the kind of wide-eyed fascination usually reserved for celebrities. "Wait, are you the Adrian Vance, the investor?" Adrian smiled. "Just Adrian." "Oh my God," Emma breathed. Clara's mother finally found her voice again. "How did you two—" "We met a few months ago," Clara said, sticking to the script. "We've been keeping things quiet." "Quiet," her mother repeated, like the word didn't make sense. "Clara's been through a lot," Adrian said, his tone gentle but firm. "We wanted to make sure we were serious before going public." Her mother looked between them, clearly trying to decide if this was real or some kind of elaborate joke. "And you're serious?" Adrian's hand tightened slightly on Clara's waist. "Very." The single word carried weight, certainty, the kind of conviction that didn't invite follow-up questions. Her mother swallowed. "I see." An awkward silence settled over the group before her father cleared his throat. "Well, it's good to see you happy, Clara." The kindness in his voice almost broke her. "Thanks, Dad." Emma leaned in, lowering her voice to a stage whisper. "He's so hot. How did you even—" "Emma," their mother hissed. But Clara laughed, a real laugh, not the polite one she'd been practicing. "I'll tell you later." "You better." A server passed by with champagne, and Adrian snagged 2 flutes, handing one to Clara. She took it gratefully, needing something to do with her hands. "We should find our seats," Adrian said smoothly. "I'm sure we'll see you inside." It was a polite exit, and Clara's family took the hint. Her mother nodded, still looking shell-shocked, and they drifted toward another cluster of guests. The moment they were out of earshot, Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That was easier than you thought," Adrian finished. "I was going to say terrifying." "Same thing." They moved through the crowd, and Clara became acutely aware of how many people were watching them. Not just watching, staring. She recognized some faces from her past life with Daniel, colleagues from the architecture firm where she used to work before the humiliation drove her to quit, friends from college who'd slowly stopped calling after the wedding disaster, people who'd known her as Daniel's fiancé and nothing more. Now they were seeing her as someone else entirely. "They're all staring," Clara murmured. "Let them," Adrian said. "You look incredible. They should stare." "That's not why they're staring." "Isn't it?" Before Clara could answer, a voice cut through the ambient noise like a knife. "Well, this is unexpected." Clara's entire body went rigid. She turned slowly, and there he was. Daniel Harrington. He looked exactly the same as he had 3 months ago. Blonde hair perfectly styled, blue eyes cold and assessing, that same smug half-smile that used to make her feel special and now just made her nauseous. He wore a gray suit that probably cost a fortune and fit him like he'd been born in it. Beside him stood a woman Clara didn't recognize. Brunette, tall, stunning in a way that seemed effortless. She wore a cream-colored dress that showed off her tan and held Daniel's arm like she owned it. The new fiancé. "Daniel," Clara said, and was proud that her voice didn't shake. His gaze raked over her, head to toe, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. Then it shifted to Adrian, and something flickered in his expression. Recognition. And wariness. "I didn't think you'd come," Daniel said. "Why wouldn't I?" Clara countered. "I just thought, after everything, it might be awkward." "For who?" That landed. Daniel's smile tightened fractionally. The brunette beside him extended her hand toward Clara, her smile bright and utterly fake. "I'm Vanessa. Daniel's told me so much about you." Clara shook her hand briefly. "I'm sure he has." "All good things," Vanessa added quickly, like that made it better. "Of course." Vanessa's gaze slid to Adrian, and her eyes widened slightly. Clara watched her do the same mental math her mother had done, processing the suit, the watch, the aura of barely contained power that followed Adrian like a shadow. "And you are?" Vanessa asked, her tone shifting to something that might have been flirtation. Adrian smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Adrian Vance, Clara's boyfriend." The word boyfriend hung in the air like a challenge. Daniel's expression went carefully neutral, but Clara knew him well enough to see the surprise underneath. "Boyfriend, that's fast." "Not really," Adrian said smoothly. "We've been together for 6 months." 6 months, Daniel repeated. He looked at Clara. "You didn't mention you were seeing anyone." "You didn't ask." "We haven't exactly been in contact." "No," Clara agreed. "We haven't." Another awkward silence. Vanessa laughed, high and nervous. "Well, it's so great that we can all be mature about this, right? I mean, what happened with you two is in the past, and now we're all moving forward. It's really healthy." Clara wanted to throw her champagne in Vanessa's face. Instead, she smiled sweetly. "Absolutely. Very healthy." Adrian's hand moved to the small of Clara's back, warm and possessive. "We should let you two get back to your guests. I'm sure you're busy." It was another polite dismissal, but Daniel didn't take the hint. "Actually, I wanted to talk to Clara," he said. "Alone. Just for a minute." Clara's pulse spiked. "I don't think—" "Please," Daniel said, and there was something in his tone that reminded her of the man she'd fallen in love with years ago, before the arrogance, before the betrayal. "Just 1 minute." Adrian's hand tightened on her back, a silent question. "Do you want me to shut this down?" Clara looked at Daniel, really looked at him, and realized something had shifted. She wasn't afraid of him anymore, wasn't desperate for his approval or crushed by his rejection. She was just done. 1 minute, she said. Adrian hesitated, then nodded. "I'll be right over there." He stepped away, taking Vanessa with him under the guise of small talk, And suddenly Clara was alone with the man who'd broken her heart in front of everyone she knew. Daniel waited until they were out of earshot before speaking. "You look good, Clara." "Thanks. I mean it. You look different." "I am different." He studied her, and she could see him trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the one he'd left crying at the altar. "Adrian Vance, that's a hell of an upgrade." Clara's jaw tightened. "He's not an upgrade. He's just different from you." "Different how?" "He doesn't lie to me." That hit home. Daniel flinched. "Clara, why did you want to talk to me, Daniel? What could you possibly have to say that I'd want to hear?" He looked genuinely uncomfortable now, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I wanted to make sure you were okay, that you weren't doing this to, I don't know, prove something." Clara laughed, and it came out bitter. "Prove something? To who? You?" "I hurt you, I know I did. And I'm sorry for that. I really am. But what? But I don't want you to do something you'll regret just because you're angry at me." The sheer audacity of it took her breath away. "You think I'm with Adrian to make you jealous? I think you showed up here with someone you barely know because you wanted to prove you'd moved on." "I have moved on." "Have you, or are you just pretending?" Clara stepped closer, and Daniel actually took a step back. "Good. You don't get to do this," she said quietly, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "You don't get to leave me at the altar, humiliate me in front of everyone we know, move on with someone else in less than a month, and then question my choices. You lost that right the second you walked out of that church. I know, and I don't care if you're sorry. I don't care what you think about Adrian or my decisions or anything else. You're nothing to me now, Daniel. Just a mistake I'm done paying for." She turned to walk away, but Daniel grabbed her arm. "Clara, wait." He didn't get to finish. Adrian was there in an instant, his hand closing around Daniel's wrist with enough pressure to make the other man wince. "Let go!" It wasn't a request. Daniel released Clara immediately, stumbling back. You were just leaving," Adrian said, his voice flat and cold and utterly devoid of mercy. "Weren't you?" For a second, Clara thought Daniel might argue, but whatever he saw in Adrian's face made him think better of it. "Yeah," Daniel muttered. "I was." He walked away, disappearing into the crowd without looking back. Adrian turned to Clara, his expression shifting immediately from dangerous to concerned. "You okay?" Clara realized her hands were shaking. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "What did he say?" "He wanted to know if I was with you just to make him jealous." Adrian's jaw tightened. "What did you tell him?" "That he lost the right to question my choices when he left me at the altar." Something like pride flickered across Adrian's face. "Good." A bell chimed somewhere, signaling guests to move into the main hall for the ceremony. Clara took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I need a minute," she said. "Take your time." She headed toward the restroom, heels clicking on marble floors, and locked herself in a stall. For a moment, she just stood there, forehead pressed against the cool metal door, trying to process everything that had just happened. She'd done it. She'd faced Daniel, held her ground, walked away. And Adrian had been there, ready to step in, ready to protect her. The realization settled over her like a weight. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. Somewhere in the last 2 weeks, something had shifted. She'd started to care about Adrian in a way that had nothing to do with their arrangement, and everything to do with who he was when no one else was watching. The man who'd taught her to stand tall, who'd kissed her like it mattered, who'd grabbed Daniel's wrist and made him back down without even raising his voice. Clara pressed her hands to her face and tried to breathe. This was dangerous. This was stupid. This was exactly the kind of thing that ended badly. But she didn't care. She straightened, fixed her lipstick, and walked back out. Adrian was waiting in the hallway, leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets. When he saw her, he straightened. "Better?" "Yeah." He offered his arm again, and she took it. They walked into the main hall together, and Clara felt every eye in the room track their movement. The ceremony space was even more elaborate than the cocktail area. Rows of white chairs facing an altar draped in flowers, string quartet playing softly in the corner, late afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. They found their seats near the back. Clara was grateful. The farther from the altar, the better. The ceremony started 10 minutes later. Daniel's brother, Clara's former best friend's new husband, stood at the altar looking nervous. The music swelled. Bridesmaids walked down the aisle in pale pink. And then the bride appeared, beautiful and glowing, and everyone stood. Clara forced herself to watch, forced herself to smile, forced herself not to think about the last time she'd been at a wedding in a white dress, waiting for a groom who never showed. Adrian's hand found hers under the cover of standing guests, his fingers threading through hers, squeezing once, grounding her. She squeezed back. The ceremony was mercifully short. Vows were exchanged, rings were placed. The couple kissed, and everyone applauded. Clara clapped along with everyone else, and she realized with something like surprise that she felt nothing. No jealousy, no longing, no grief, just relief that it wasn't her up there. The reception was held in the estate's ballroom, a massive space with vaulted ceilings and chandeliers that looked like they weighed more than Clara's car. Tables were arranged in clusters. A band was setting up in the corner, and the bar was already doing brisk business. Clara and Adrian found their assigned table mercifully far from the head table where Daniel sat with Vanessa, and settled in. The other guests at their table were people Clara vaguely recognized but didn't really know. They made polite small talk, asked the standard questions about how Clara and Adrian met, and seemed satisfied with the rehearsed answers. Dinner was served, some kind of fish that probably cost more per plate than Clara's monthly grocery bill. Clara pushed it around with her fork, not really tasting anything. "You need to eat," Adrian said quietly. "I'm not hungry. You're going to pass out if you don't eat something." He was probably right. Clara forced down a few bites, washed them down with champagne, and tried to focus on the conversation around her. But she kept catching glimpses of Daniel across the room, laughing with Vanessa, dancing with his mother, playing the role of perfect groom at his brother's perfect wedding. And every time she saw him, she felt Adrian's presence beside her like a shield. The band started playing, and couples began moving to the dance floor. Adrian stood and offered his hand. "Dance with me." It wasn't a question. Clara took his hand and let him lead her onto the floor. He pulled her close, one hand on her waist, the other holding hers, and they began to move. "You're tense," he murmured. "I'm fine." "You're lying." "Maybe." They swayed in silence for a moment before Adrian spoke again. "He's watching." "Who?" "Daniel. He's been watching you all night." Clara looked over Adrian's shoulder and caught Daniel's gaze across the room. He looked away immediately. "Good," she said. Adrian smiled slightly. "You wanted him to see you've moved on." "Yes." "Mission accomplished then." Clara looked up at Adrian, at the strong line of his jaw, the dark eyes that seemed to see straight through her, the mouth that had kissed her last night in a way that still made her stomach flip. "Adrian?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for all of this. I know it's ridiculous and you had no reason to say yes, but you did, and it means more than you know." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're welcome." The song ended and another began. They kept dancing. And somewhere between one song and the next, Clara realized she'd forgotten this was supposed to be fake. The way Adrian held her felt real. The way he looked at her felt real. The way her heart raced when he pulled her closer felt real. She was in trouble, big trouble. But before she could process that thought, before she could figure out what it meant or what to do about it, the music cut off abruptly. The band stopped mid-song. Conversations died. Everyone turned toward the entrance, and that's when Clara heard it. Gunfire. The first shot cracked through the air like a whip, sharp and unmistakable. For a split second, nobody moved. The human brain needs time to process things that don't belong. A gunshot at a wedding falls into that category. Clara stood frozen on the dance floor, Adrian's hand still wrapped around her waist, both of them locked in place like statues. Then the second shot came, and the third, and all hell broke loose. People screamed, the kind of primal, gut-level screaming that came from somewhere beyond rational thought. Chairs scraped against marble as guests scrambled away from the entrance. A woman in a silver dress tripped over her heels and went down hard. Two men in expensive suits dove under a table. The string quartet abandoned their instruments and ran for the kitchen. Adrian's entire body changed in an instant. The careful control, the measured movements, the The gentleman who'd been dancing with her seconds ago, gone. What replaced it was something else entirely. Something Clara had glimpsed in shadows but never seen in full light. His hand clamped down on her wrist like iron. "Get down," he said, and his voice carried the kind of authority that bypassed her brain and went straight to her survival instincts. He pulled her down behind the nearest table just as another round of gunfire tore through the room. Clara heard glass shatter, one of the massive chandeliers exploding in a shower of crystal. Screams intensified. Someone was crying. Someone else was praying. Adrian had his phone out, typing one-handed while keeping Clara pressed against him with the other. His jaw was set, eyes scanning the room with the kind of tactical assessment that suggested this wasn't his first firefight. Clara's mind was racing, trying to catch up. This couldn't be happening. This was a wedding, a boring upper-class wedding full of trust fund kids and their parents' money. Things like this didn't happen here. But they were happening. "Adrian," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "What? Quiet." It wasn't mean, just focused. His attention was divided between his phone, the entrance where the shots were coming from, and the chaos unfolding around them. More gunfire. Closer now. Clara risked a glance around the edge of the table and immediately wished she hadn't. 3 men in black tactical gear were moving through the entrance, weapons raised, faces covered. They weren't shooting randomly anymore. They were scanning the crowd, looking for something, or someone. And then one of them locked eyes with Adrian. Everything slowed down. The man raised his weapon, barrel swinging toward their table, and Clara's entire body went cold. She'd never had a gun pointed at her before. Never understood how completely paralyzing it could be to stare down that small black circle and know that your life could end in the next second. Adrian moved. He grabbed Clara by the shoulders and threw her backward, hard, sending her sliding across the polished floor behind a marble pillar, just as the table they'd been hiding behind exploded in a hail of bullets. Wood splintered, china shattered. The white tablecloth caught fire from the muzzle flash. Clara hit the pillar and scrambled to press herself against it, hands shaking so badly she could barely control them. Her ears were ringing. Her dress was torn. She tasted blood. She'd bitten her lip without realizing it. Adrian was on his feet now, moving with the kind of speed and precision that came from years of practice. He grabbed a chair and hurled it at the nearest gunman. It connected with this man's head, sending him stumbling backward. Adrian closed the distance in 3 strides, grabbed the man's weapon, twisted it away, and drove his elbow into the man's throat. The gunman went down hard. Adrian had the rifle now. He checked the magazine with practiced efficiency, raised it, and fired twice. Clara couldn't see what he hit, but she heard someone scream and fall. This was insane. This was absolutely insane. Adrian ducked behind another table as return fire ripped through the space where he'd been standing. He looked across the room, found Clara behind the pillar, and their eyes met. "Stay there," he mouthed, like she had any intention of moving. Clara pressed herself harder against the marble, making herself as small as possible, and tried to process what she was seeing. Adrian Vance, the man who'd taught her how to walk in heels, who'd kissed her last night like she was something precious, was dismantling armed men with the kind of brutal efficiency that suggested he'd done this before. Many times before. She'd known he was dangerous, known his business wasn't legitimate, but knowing and seeing were completely different things. More security appeared, the venue's own team judging by their uniforms. They engaged the intruders, and the ballroom became a war zone. Bullets tore through silk drapes. Mirrors shattered. The grand piano near the stage took 3 rounds and emitted a discordant wail as strings snapped. Clara caught sight of her mother across the room, huddled under a table with her father and Emma. Her father had his arms wrapped around both of them, shielding them with his body. Emma was crying silently, mascara running down her face. Her mother's eyes met Clara's across the chaos, wide with terror. Clara wanted to go to them, wanted to make sure they were okay. But she couldn't move. Couldn't do anything but press herself against this pillar and pray she survived the next 5 minutes. Adrian was working his way back toward her, using tables and pillars as cover, taking shots when he had them. He moved like someone who'd been in combat before, smooth, calculated, never staying in one place long enough to become a target. He reached Clara's pillar and dropped down beside her, breathing hard but controlled. There was blood on his white shirt. She didn't know if it was his. "You hit?" he asked, eyes scanning her for injuries. Clara shook her head, not trusting her voice. Good. We're getting out of here. My family, Marcus has them. He's moving them to the east exit right now. Clara blinked. Marcus is here? Marcus is always here. Of course he was. Clara had a sudden flash of understanding. Adrian hadn't come to this wedding alone. He'd brought security, had probably scoped the place out beforehand, had contingency plans for scenarios exactly like this. Because this was his world. Violence and gunfire and split-second life-or-death decisions. This was what he did. And she'd walked into it wearing a silk dress and heels, thinking the most dangerous thing about tonight would be facing Daniel. How stupid could she be? Adrian was checking his rifle, almost out of ammunition. He dropped the magazine, pocketed it, and drew something from an ankle holster. A handgun, small, black, deadly. When I say run, he said, not looking at her, you run. Straight for that exit sign. He pointed across the room. Don't stop. Don't look back. Marcus will be there. What about you? I'll be right behind you. Adrian, Clara. He looked at her then, and his eyes were hard. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? She nodded. Say it. I trust you. Something flickered in his expression, surprise maybe, or something softer, but it was gone before she could identify it. Good. Ready? No. He almost smiled. Me neither. Run. Clara ran. She kicked off her heels without thinking and sprinted barefoot across the ballroom floor. Her dress tangled around her legs, and she hiked it up with both hands, not caring about modesty or elegance or anything except getting to that exit sign. Behind her, she heard Adrian firing, covering her, keeping the shooters pinned down. The floor was slick with spilled champagne and broken glass. Clara's feet hit something sharp, and she felt pain lance through her soul, but she didn't stop, couldn't stop, just kept running while her heart hammered against her ribs, and her breath came in ragged gasps. She was halfway across the room when one of the shooters spotted her. He swung his weapon toward her, and Clara saw it happening like it was in slow motion, his finger tightening on the trigger, the barrel tracking her movement, the inevitability of what came next. She wasn't going to make it. But then Daniel stepped out from behind a table, directly into the line of fire. Clara didn't know if he did it on purpose or if it was just terrible timing. Either way, the gunman's attention shifted. He turned the weapon on Daniel, and Daniel froze like a deer in headlights. Adrian took the shot. The gunman went down, and Daniel dropped to his knees, hands over his head, completely falling apart. Vanessa was screaming his name from somewhere behind an overturned buffet table. Clara kept running. She hit the exit at full speed and crashed through the door into a service hallway. Marcus was there, exactly like Adrian said he would be, along with two other men she didn't recognize. They were armed, professional, scanning the hallway like they expected trouble. This way, Marcus said, grabbing her arm. He pulled her down the hallway, moving fast, and Clara stumbled, trying to keep up. Her feet were bleeding, her dress was torn. She'd lost her clutch somewhere in the chaos and had no idea where. They burst out into the parking area where a black SUV was waiting, engine running. Marcus shoved Clara into the back seat and climbed in after her. The two other men took the front. Go! Marcus barked. The SUV peeled out, tires screeching on pavement. Clara twisted around to look through the rear window. She could see the estate behind them, beautiful and serene from the outside. No sign of the violence happening within. People were starting to emerge from other exits, running, crying, pulling out phones. Adrian, Clara said. Where's Adrian? He's handling it, Marcus said. What does that mean? It means he's doing what he needs to do. He'll meet us at the safe house. Safe house? Clara's voice was rising, panic creeping in. What are you talking about? We need to go back. We're not going back, Marcus said firmly. And you need to calm down before you hyperventilate. Clara realized she was breathing too fast, her vision starting to blur at the edges. She pressed her hands to her face and forced herself to slow down. In through the nose, out through the mouth, again. Marcus was on his phone, speaking in rapid Mandarin to someone. Clara didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone, urgent, controlled, getting information. He hung up and looked at her. Your family's out. They're safe. Different car, different route, but they're clear of the venue. Relief hit Clara so hard she actually swayed. Are you sure? I'm sure. Adrian had 3 teams positioned around the venue. Everyone who matters got out. Clara closed her eyes. Her mother was safe. Her father, Emma. They were okay. But Adrian was still back there. Who were those men? She asked. The shooters. Who were they? Marcus hesitated, and Clara could see him weighing how much to tell her. The truth, she said. Please. I think I've earned that. He sighed. They were Kozlov's people. Viktor Kozlov runs the Russian syndicate operating out of the docks. He and Adrian have been at odds for the last 6 months over territory disputes. So this was about Adrian. This was about sending a message. By shooting up a wedding? Marcus's expression was grim. Kozlov doesn't care about collateral damage. He wanted Adrian to know that nowhere is safe, that he can reach him anywhere, anytime. Clara felt sick. All those people, her family, the other guests, people who had nothing to do with Adrian's world, they'd all been in danger because of her, because she'd asked Adrian to come to this wedding, because she'd been selfish and stupid and too focused on her own petty revenge to think about consequences. This is my fault, she whispered. No, Marcus said sharply. This is Kozlov's fault, and he's going to pay for it. The way he said it made Clara's blood run cold. They drove for another 20 minutes, leaving the city proper and heading into an area Clara didn't recognize. Industrial buildings gave way to residential streets, which gave way to something that looked almost rural. Trees lined the road. No streetlights. Finally, they turned down a long driveway that led to a house set back from the road. It was big, but not ostentatious. 2 stories, modern architecture, lots of windows. Security lights clicked on as they approached. The SUV pulled up to the front entrance, and Marcus got out, gesturing for Clara to follow. She did, wincing as her cut feet hit gravel. Marcus noticed. We'll get that looked at inside. The front door opened before they reached it, and a woman appeared. Mid-50s, Asian, wearing scrubs like she'd just come from a hospital. She took one look at Clara and shook her head. Every time, she muttered. Every single time. This is Dr. Lin, Marcus said. She's going to patch you up. Doctor. Lin gestured Clara inside. The house was surprisingly warm, lived in even. Comfortable furniture, art on the walls, a kitchen visible through an archway that smelled like someone had been cooking recently. Sit, Dr. Lin said, pointing to a chair. Clara sat. The doctor knelt down and examined Clara's feet, tisking at what she found. Glass and gravel. You're lucky you didn't sever anything important. This is going to hurt. She wasn't kidding. The next 15 minutes were excruciating as Dr. Lin cleaned and bandaged Clara's feet, removing debris and applying antiseptic that burned like fire. Clara bit down on a dish towel and tried not to scream. When it was done, her feet were wrapped in gauze, and she'd been given ibuprofen and water. Dr. Lin stood, gathering her supplies. You'll live, she said. Keep them elevated. Change the dressing tomorrow. And maybe consider wearing shoes next time you run through a war zone. Clara almost laughed. Almost. Dr. Lin left, and Clara was alone in the room. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapped her arms around them, and tried to process everything that had happened in the last hour. The gunfire. The chaos. Adrian moving through armed men like it was nothing. Daniel's face when he thought he was going to die. Her mother's terrified eyes. And Adrian, still back there. What if something happened to him? What if Kozlov's men had better aim than Adrian gave them credit for? What if he didn't make it out? Clara realized with startling clarity that the thought of Adrian not coming back made her feel like she couldn't breathe. When had that happened? When had he become someone she needed to come back? The front door opened, and Clara's head snapped up. Marcus entered first, then 2 other men, and then Adrian. He was alive, standing, moving under his own power, but he looked like he'd been through a meat grinder. His shirt was torn and soaked with blood. Definitely his this time. There was a cut above his eyebrow, blood running down the side of his face. His knuckles were split and bruised. He moved stiffly, like his ribs hurt. But he was alive. Clara stood up without thinking, ignoring the pain in her feet, and crossed the room. Adrian saw her coming and opened his mouth, probably to tell her to sit back down, to take it easy, but she didn't give him the chance. She threw her arms around him and held on tight. For a second, Adrian just stood there, frozen. Then his arms came up and wrapped around her, pulling her close. "You're okay," Clara said into his chest. It wasn't a question, more like she was trying to convince herself. "I'm okay," Adrian confirmed, his voice rough. They stood like that for a long moment before Marcus cleared his throat. "Boss, you're bleeding on the floor." Adrian pulled back reluctantly. "I'm fine." "You're not fine," Dr. Lin said, reappearing from somewhere. "Sit, now." This time, Adrian didn't argue. He lowered himself into a chair, wincing as he moved, and let Dr. Lin start assessing his injuries. Clara hovered nearby, not sure what to do with herself. Marcus caught her eye and gestured toward the kitchen. "Come on, you need food." She followed him, glancing back at Adrian one more time before they left the room. The kitchen was large and well-equipped. Marcus pulled containers out of the refrigerator, leftover Chinese food by the looks of it, and started heating things up. "Eat," he said, sliding a plate toward her. Clara wasn't hungry, but she picked up a fork anyway. "What happens now?" "Now we wait. Let the dust settle. Figure out our next move." "You mean Adrian's next move?" "Same thing." Clara set down her fork. "How long has this been going on? The thing with Kozlov?" Marcus considered her for a moment, like he was deciding how much to share. 6 months, give or take. Started as a territorial dispute. Escalated when Kozlov tried to move in on one of Adrian's operations. Adrian pushed back. It's been building ever since. And tonight was Kozlov pushing back. Tonight was Kozlov being reckless. Attacking a public venue, putting civilians at risk. That crosses lines even in our world. He's made himself a target. "What does that mean?" Marcus met her eyes. "It means this isn't over." Clara felt cold. People could have died tonight. My family could have died. But they didn't. Adrian made sure of that. By planning for this? By bringing security to a wedding? By being prepared for the worst, Marcus said evenly. That's how you survive in this business. You assume nothing is safe. You plan for everything. You protect the people who matter. And I matter? The question came out smaller than Clara intended. Marcus's expression softened fractionally. You wouldn't be here if you didn't. Clara didn't know what to say to that. She picked at her food while Marcus made phone calls, coordinating with other teams, getting updates on the situation back at the estate. Apparently, local police had shown up. Witnesses were being interviewed. 3 of Kozlov's men were dead. 2 were in custody. 1 had escaped. No civilians had been killed, though several were injured. Daniel Harrington had been treated for shock. Vanessa was hysterical but physically unharmed. Clara's family had been taken to a hotel downtown and were under discreet protection until Adrian gave the all clear. It was organized chaos, and Clara was starting to understand that all of this, was normal for Adrian. The contingency plans, the safe houses, the armed security, the quick extraction. He lived in a world where violence could erupt at any moment, and he'd built systems to handle it. She'd just never expected to be part of those systems. Dr. Lin finished with Adrian and emerged from the other room, stripping off gloves. He's stitched up, 3 cracked ribs, multiple contusions, minor lacerations. He needs rest, but he'll be fine. Define fine, Marcus said dryly. Fine as in he'll survive to make more bad decisions. Marcus almost smiled. Clara stood. Can I see him? Dr. Lin gestured toward the living room. Be my guest. Maybe you can convince him to actually rest. Clara doubted that, but she went anyway. Adrian was still sitting in the chair, but his shirt was off now, revealing a torso wrapped in bandages. His face had been cleaned up, the cut above his eyebrow covered with a small bandage. He looked exhausted. He also looked somehow more human than she'd ever seen him, vulnerable, almost. When Clara entered, he looked up, and something in his expression shifted. You should be resting. So should you. I'm fine. You have 3 cracked ribs. Dr. Lin talks too much. Clara pulled up a chair and sat across from him. They looked at each other in silence for a long moment. Finally, Clara said, You saved my life. You wouldn't have been in danger if it wasn't for me. That's not true. I'm the one who asked you to come to that wedding. I'm the one who dragged you into my mess. Your mess was a jilted ex-fiancé. My mess involves armed gunmen and Russian syndicates. There's a difference. Clara leaned forward. Why didn't you tell me? that you were expecting trouble. Would you have come if I did? I don't know. Maybe not. Exactly. So you just let me walk in blind? Adrian's jaw tightened. I had it handled. I had security. I had exit strategies. I wasn't going to let anything happen to you. But something did happen. We got shot at. People got hurt. But you didn't, Adrian said, and there was intensity in his voice now. You didn't get hurt. Neither did your family. That's what matters. What about you? Clara shot back. You got hurt. You could have been killed. I've been hurt before. I'll be hurt again. That's the job. This isn't a job, Adrian. This is your life, and it's... She stopped, trying to find the words. It's insane. How do you live like this? Always looking over your shoulder, always waiting for the next attack. You get used to it. Do you? Really? Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, No, not really. You just learn to function anyway. The honesty of it hit Clara harder than she expected. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers were bruised and cut, but they closed around hers with surprising gentleness. I'm sorry, she said, for dragging you into this. For being so focused on my own stupid problems that I didn't think about the bigger picture. Your problems aren't stupid, Adrian said. They're just different from mine. Daniel left me at the altar. You deal with Russian mob bosses. There's a pretty big gap there. Pain is pain, doesn't matter where it comes from. Clara blinked, surprised by the insight. That's very profound. I have my moments. They sat in silence for a while, hands still linked, both processing everything that had happened. Finally, Adrian spoke again. You should stay here tonight. It's not safe for you to go home yet. For how long? Until I've dealt with Kozlov. Dealt with how? Adrian's expression went cold. However necessary. Clara should have been scared, should have pulled her hand away and demanded to go home, to get as far away from Adrian and his world as possible. But she didn't. Instead, she squeezed his hand and said, Okay. Adrian looked at her, really looked at her, and Clara saw the question in his eyes. Why are you still here? She wasn't sure she had an answer, or maybe she did, but wasn't ready to admit it yet. You should sleep, Adrian said finally. So should you. I will, eventually. Marcus appeared in the doorway. Boss, we've got a situation. Adrian's entire demeanor changed instantly. What kind of situation? Kozlov's people are moving. Looks like they're consolidating at the warehouse district. Could be preparing for retaliation. Adrian stood, moving stiffly, but with purpose. Get the crew together. I want eyes on every entrance. You're not going, Clara said, standing as well. You just got stitched up. You need to rest. Adrian looked at her like she'd suggested he grow wings and fly. Clara, no. You said it yourself. You have cracked ribs. You're in no condition to go pick a fight with armed men. I'm not picking a fight. I'm ending one. By doing what? Getting yourself killed? By making sure Kozlov knows there are consequences for tonight. Clara stepped closer, ignoring the pain in her feet. Adrian, please, just wait. One night. Let yourself heal, then you can go wage your war or whatever you need to do. This can't wait. Why not? Because if I don't respond immediately, I look weak, and weakness gets you killed in my world. And rushing into a fight when you're injured gets you killed faster. They stared at each other, locked in a battle of wills. Marcus cleared his throat. For what it's worth, she's not wrong. You're moving at maybe 60%. That's a liability in the field. Adrian shot him a look. Whose side are you on? Yours, always, which is why I'm telling you this is a bad call. Adrian's jaw worked like he was grinding his teeth. Finally, he said, Fine, we don't move tonight. But first thing tomorrow, we go. First thing tomorrow, Marcus agreed. He left, and Adrian sank back into the chair, wincing as his ribs protested. Clara sat down beside him again. Thank you. For what? For listening. I didn't listen. I was outnumbered. Clara smiled despite everything. Take the win, Adrian. He looked at her, and something in his expression softened. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who'd run at the first sign of trouble. Maybe I should have. But you didn't. No, Clara said quietly. I didn't. The weight of that truth settled between them. Adrian reached up and touched her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "You're bleeding." Clara touched her own face and realized he was right. There was a small cut she hadn't even noticed. Must have happened during the chaos. "Let me see." He leaned forward, examining the cut with careful attention. His fingers were gentle despite the bruising, and Clara found herself holding very still, acutely aware of how close he was. "It's not deep," Adrian said. "Probably from flying glass." "I'll live." "Yes," he said, and his voice had gone quiet. "You will." Their eyes met, and Clara saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch. Something raw and unguarded that she'd never seen before. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, but then he pulled back, clearing his throat, and the moment passed. "You should get some sleep," he said, standing carefully. "There's a guest room upstairs, second door on the left. Dr. Lin left clothes for you." Clara nodded, standing as well. "What about you?" "I've got things to do." "Adrian?" "I'll rest. Eventually. I promise." He wouldn't. Clara knew he wouldn't, but she also knew pushing him wouldn't help. She headed for the stairs, each step sending pain through her bandaged feet. Halfway up, she turned back. Adrian was watching her. "Hey," she said. "Yeah?" "We're not done talking about this. About what tonight means. About what happens next." Adrian's expression was unreadable. "I know." Clara nodded and continued up the stairs. The guest room was simple but comfortable. Clean sheets, soft pillows, a window overlooking the dark yard. The clothes doctor. Lynn had left were basic, sweatpants and a t-shirt, both too big but clean. Clara changed, washed her face in the attached bathroom, and climbed into bed. She should have fallen asleep immediately. Her body was exhausted, running on fumes and adrenaline crashes, but her mind wouldn't stop. She kept replaying the night, the gunfire, Adrian's face when he'd thrown her to safety, the cold efficiency with which he'd moved through armed men, the blood on his shirt, the fear in her mother's eyes, and that moment downstairs when Adrian had touched her face and looked at her like she was something worth protecting. Clara rolled over and stared at the ceiling. She was in love with him. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Somewhere between the velvet room and tonight, between walking lessons and cover stories and a kiss that was supposed to be practice, she'd fallen completely and irrevocably in love with Adrian Vance, a man who lived in shadows and violence, a man who had enemies with guns and no qualms about using them, a man who was probably planning something dangerous for tomorrow that he wouldn't tell her about. She was in love with him, and she had no idea what to do about it. Clara didn't sleep. She lay in the dark for hours, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling, voices drifting up from downstairs, cars coming and going outside. At some point, she heard Adrian's voice, low and commanding, giving orders to people whose names she didn't know, planning something, preparing for tomorrow. Around 3 a.m, she gave up and went downstairs. The house was quiet now. Most of the security team had cleared out, leaving just one man positioned by the front door. He nodded at Clara as she passed, but didn't speak. She found the kitchen and made herself tea, more for something to do with her hands than because she wanted it. She was sitting at the counter, staring into her mug, when Adrian appeared in the doorway. He'd changed clothes, dark jeans and a black t-shirt that showed the edge of bandages underneath. His hair was damp like he'd showered. The cut above his eyebrow stood out stark against his skin. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Can you?" "Not really." He crossed to the coffee maker and started a pot, moving carefully to avoid aggravating his ribs. Clara watched him, trying to reconcile this man with the one who'd systematically taken down armed gunmen 6 hours ago. "How are your feet?" Adrian asked without turning around. "They hurt, but I'll live. Dr. Lin's good at what she does. She seems used to patching people up after your situations." "She is." The coffee maker gurgled and hissed. Adrian poured himself a cup and leaned against the counter across from her. They looked at each other in the dim kitchen light. "I called your mother," Adrian said. "Told her you were safe, that you were staying with me for a few days." Clara's stomach dropped. "What did she say?" "She was more worried about you being traumatized than about you staying with me. I think I've been upgraded from mysterious boyfriend to the man who kept my daughter alive." "That's one way to meet the parents." Adrian's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Your father asked if I was responsible for what happened. And what did you tell him? The truth. That it was my enemies, my world, my fault you were in danger. Clara set down her mug. What did he say to that? He said he appreciated the honesty. Then he asked if I was planning to keep you safe going forward. And? Adrian met her eyes. I said yes. The weight of that word hung between them. Clara wrapped both hands around her mug, needing something to anchor her. Adrian, what are we doing here? Drinking caffeinated beverages at 3 a.m. You know what I mean. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down his coffee and crossed to where she sat. He didn't touch her, just stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. I don't know, he said finally. I told myself this was just a deal. You needed a date? I was curious. 2 weeks and done. But somewhere in there it stopped being fake. Clara's heart was pounding. When? I'm not sure. Maybe when you walked into that first boutique and tried on that black dress and looked at yourself like you didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. Or when you called me out for being a terrible dancer and I realized you weren't afraid of me anymore. Or maybe it was last night when I kissed you and you kissed me back like you meant it. I did mean it, Clara whispered. Adrian's hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone just below the small cut. This world I'm in, it's not going to get safer. Tonight wasn't an anomaly. It's who I am, what I do. And people like Kozlov are always going to see anyone close to me as a target. I know. Do you? Because knowing and living with it are different things. Tonight you got a taste. But it gets worse. It gets darker. And I can protect you from a lot of things, but I can't protect you from the reality of what being with me means. Clara stood up, ignoring the pain in her feet, and looked him straight in the eyes. I'm not asking you to protect me from reality. I'm asking you to stop trying to push me away. I'm not. You are. You're doing it right now. You're telling me all the reasons this won't work instead of asking me what I want. What do you want? The question was simple. The answer wasn't. Clara took a breath. 2 weeks ago, I was so broken I walked into a crime boss's den and offered him my grandmother's ring for one night of pretending. I was pathetic, lost, defined by someone else's rejection. But you didn't see that. You saw something else. Someone who could be strong if she learned how. And you taught me, not just how to walk in heels or hold eye contact, but how to stop apologizing for existing, how to take up space, how to matter. Clara, I'm not done. Tonight was terrifying. The gunfire, the chaos, thinking you might not make it out. That was the worst thing I've ever experienced. But you want to know what I realized while I was sitting in that guest room, unable to sleep? Adrian said nothing, just watched her with those dark, unreadable eyes. I realized I'd rather have one real day with you than 1,000 safe, boring days with someone like Daniel. I'd rather stand next to you in the fire than sit in the safety of a life that doesn't matter. And I know that's probably crazy, and I know this could end badly, but I don't care. She stepped closer, close enough to feel his breath on her face. So stop telling me why this won't work and just tell me the truth. Do you want me to stay or go? Adrian's jaw worked. His hand was still on her face, thumb still tracing that small cut, and Clara could see the war happening behind his eyes. All the reasons he should say go. All the ways he could keep her safe by pushing her away. But then something shifted. Some internal barrier crumbled. Stay, he said, his voice rough. I want you to stay. Clara kissed him. Not carefully. Not like they were practicing for an audience, but hard and desperate and real, pouring every complicated feeling from the last 2 weeks into it. Adrian made a sound low in his throat and kissed her back with the same intensity, his hands sliding into her hair, pulling her closer despite his injured ribs. They broke apart, breathing hard. This is a terrible idea, Adrian said. Probably. I'm going to get you hurt. Maybe. You're going to regret this. I doubt it. He kissed her again, softer this time, but no less devastating. When they pulled apart, he pressed his forehead against hers. I don't know how to do this, he admitted quietly. The relationship thing. I'm not good at it. Neither am I. My last one ended with me getting abandoned at the altar. Fair point. Clara pulled back enough to look at him. So we figure it out together. We make mistakes. We learn. We try. Just like that? Just like that. Adrian searched her face like he was looking for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that she didn't mean what she was saying. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy him because he nodded slowly. Okay. 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 Clara smiled, and it felt like the first real smile she'd managed in hours. Good. Now will you please go rest? You look like you're about to fall over. I'm fine. You have cracked ribs. I've had worse. That's not reassuring. Adrian started to respond, but his phone buzzed. He pulled it out, read the message, and his expression went hard. What is it? Claire asked. Kozlov's on the move. He's leaving the warehouse district. Marcus thinks he's heading for the docks. What does that mean? It means he's running, or he's planning something bigger. Adrian was already typing a response. Either way, we need to move now. Now? Adrian, it's 3 a.m. You're injured. You said you'd wait. That was when I thought we had time. If he's on the move, we're losing our window. Clara grabbed his arm. Then let Marcus handle it. I can't. Why not? Adrian looked at her, and there was something ancient in his eyes. Something tired. Because if I don't show up, if I send people to do my work while I hide in a safe house, I'm done. Every enemy I have will see it as weakness. Every alliance I've built will crumble. This isn't just about Kozlov. It's about every deal I've made, every territory I've claimed, every person who works for me, trusting that I won't send them somewhere I won't go myself. So your pride is more important than your safety. It's not pride, it's survival. It's both. Adrian's phone buzzed again. Another message. He glanced at it and cursed under his breath. I have to go, he said. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to physically block the door and refused to let him leave, but she could see it wouldn't matter. He'd made his decision. This was who he was. Fine, she said, but I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. You don't get to decide that. Clara, this isn't a discussion. You're staying here where it's safe. Safe? Clara let out a bitter laugh. Your safe house got shot up at a wedding 6 hours ago. Nowhere is safe. So if you're going to walk into danger, I'm going with you. No. Why not? Because I can't focus on Kozlov if I'm worried about you getting hurt. Then don't worry about me. I'll stay in the car. I'll stay out of the way. But I'm not sitting here waiting to find out if you're alive. They stared at each other, locked in another battle of wills. Finally, Marcus appeared in the doorway. Boss, we need to move. Now. Adrian looked at Clara one more time. You stay in the car. You don't get out for any reason. And if I tell you to run, you run. Understood? Understood. Say it. I'll stay in the car. I won't get out. If you tell me to run, I'll run. Adrian shook his head like he couldn't believe he was agreeing to this, then turned to Marcus. She comes, but she stays with you in the secondary vehicle. If things go wrong, you get her out first. Marcus looked between them, clearly calculating whether to argue, then nodded. Understood. Good. Let's move. 10 minutes later, Clara was in the back of another SUV, this one with Marcus at the wheel and the same 2 men from earlier in the front seat. Adrian was in a separate vehicle ahead of them with 3 other members of his crew. They were part of a convoy of 4 vehicles moving through the empty pre-dawn streets. Clara had been given a bulletproof vest that was too big and uncomfortable, but apparently non-negotiable. Her bandaged feet were stuffed into sneakers Marcus had found somewhere. She felt ridiculous and terrified and completely out of her depth. Where are we going? She asked. Pier 17, Marcus said. It's one of Kozlov's main operation points. If he's leaving the city, that's where he'll stage it. And we're just going to, what, walk up and confront him? Something like that. That's a terrible plan. Most of them are. Clara looked out the window at the city passing by. They were heading toward the industrial waterfront, an area she'd never been to and had no desire to visit. The buildings got more spread out, more run down. Streetlights became scarce. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. Are you really okay? Please call me when you can. Clara typed back, I'm fine. I promise. I'll call you tomorrow. She hesitated, then added, I love you. Her mother's response came immediately. I love you too, sweetheart. Be safe. Clara put her phone away and tried to steady her breathing. They arrived at the docks 20 minutes later. The area was a maze of shipping containers, warehouses, and access roads that all looked the same in the dark. Marcus killed the headlights, and they rolled to a stop behind Adrian's vehicle. Everyone got out. Clara stayed in the SUV like she'd promised, but she could see through the windshield as Adrian gathered his team. 9 men total, all armed, all moving with the kind of coordinated efficiency that suggested they'd done this before. Adrian was talking, giving instructions Clara couldn't hear. He moved stiffly because of his ribs, but there was no hesitation in his gestures. He was in command, in control. Then he looked back toward Clara's vehicle, and even in the dark she could see the concern in his expression. Marcus appeared at her window. "Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone except me or Adrian. You see anything suspicious, you call this number." He handed her a card with a phone number written on it. "They'll send backup." "Where are you going?" "With Adrian. We're going in quiet, see what we can find. Should be 20 minutes, maybe less." "And if it's not?" Marcus didn't answer. He just looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once and walked away. Clara locked the doors. The convoy vehicles spread out, positioning themselves at different points around the perimeter. Clara watched Adrian and his team disappear between 2 massive shipping containers swallowed by shadows. Then she was alone. The silence was oppressive. Clara could hear her own heartbeat, could feel every second ticking by like hours. She checked her phone. 3:47 in the morning. 5 minutes passed. 10. Clara's imagination started filling in the blanks. Gunfire. Adrian going down. Marcus not making it back. She tried to push the thoughts away, but they kept coming, each one worse than the last. At minute 15, she heard something. Not gunfire. Voices. Coming from somewhere to her left, beyond the row of shipping containers. Clara pressed herself lower in the seat, trying to see without being seen. 2 men emerged from between the containers, walking quickly, talking in what sounded like Russian. They wore dark clothes, moved like they knew where they were going. They passed within 15 feet of Clara's SUV without noticing her. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Then she heard the gunfire. Not the sustained automatic weapons fire from the wedding, just 2 shots, sharp, precise. Clara's heart stopped. She grabbed the door handle, ready to jump out, but forced herself to stop. She'd promised. She'd promised to stay in the car. More gunfire. Closer now. Then shouting. An explosion. Not huge, but loud enough to make Clara jump. Orange light flickered between the containers. Something was wrong. Clara pulled out the card Marcus had given her, started to dial the number, then stopped. Adrian's voice carried across the distance, shouting orders. He was alive, still fighting. More explosions. Smaller this time. Flashbangs, maybe. The driver's side window of the SUV next to Clara's exploded inward. She screamed, ducking down, hands over her head. Someone was shooting at the vehicles. She had to move. Staying here made her a sitting target. Clara grabbed the door handle and threw herself out of the SUV, hitting the ground hard. Pain lanced through her bandaged feet, but she ignored it, scrambling behind the vehicle for cover. More gunfire, coming from multiple directions now. She looked around frantically, trying to find somewhere safer to go. The shipping containers offered cover, but they were also where the fighting was happening. The warehouses behind her looked abandoned, but abandoned didn't mean safe. Then she saw him. Adrian, emerging from between 2 containers, moving fast despite his injuries. He had someone with him, a man in zip ties, being half dragged, half carried by 2 of Adrian's crew. Marcus was beside him, weapon raised, scanning for threats. Clara started to call out, but movement to her right made her freeze. One of the Russian men from earlier had circled back. He was maybe 30 feet away, raising a weapon, aiming directly at Adrian's back. Clara didn't think. She grabbed the nearest thing she could find, a piece of rebar leaning against the shipping container, and ran. She'd learned a lot in 2 weeks. How to walk in heels, how to command a room, how to hold someone's gaze without flinching. But nobody had taught her how to swing a piece of metal at an armed man. She did it anyway. The rebar connected with the gunman's shoulder just as he pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, sparking off metal somewhere to the left. The man stumbled, shocked, and turned toward Clara. For a second, they just stared at each other. Then Marcus was there, weapon pressed to the back of the man's head. "Down! Now!" The Russian dropped, hands up. Clara stood there, rebar still raised, shaking so badly she thought she might collapse. Adrian reached her in 3 strides. What the hell are you doing out of the car? Someone was shooting at the car. So you got out? I didn't have a choice. You had one job, Clara. One. Stay in the... He stopped, eyes widening, looking at something behind her. Clara started to turn, but Adrian grabbed her and pulled her down just as gunfire tore through the space where her head had been. They hit the ground hard, Adrian's body covering hers, and Clara felt him grunt in pain as his ribs took the impact. More of Adrian's team converged, returning fire, and whoever was shooting at them retreated. Adrian rolled off Clara carefully. You hit? No. Are you? I'm fine. He wasn't fine. Clara could see blood seeping through his shirt where he'd torn the stitches. You're bleeding. I said I'm fine. Marcus appeared above them. Boss, we got what we came for. We need to move. Adrian nodded, then looked at Clara. Can you walk? Yes. He pulled her to her feet. Clara's feet screamed in protest, but she stayed upright. They moved as a group back toward the vehicles, the captured Russian being dragged along with them. Clara stayed close to Adrian, trying not to slow them down, trying not to think about the fact that she'd just attacked an armed man with a piece of rebar. What was she becoming? They reached the vehicles and piled in. Adrian pushed Clara into the back seat of his SUV, then climbed in beside her. Marcus took the driver's seat. The captured Russian went in a different vehicle with 2 guards. They pulled out fast, tires squealing on pavement. Clara looked back and saw flames rising from somewhere near the containers. The other Russian crew vehicles were moving too, giving chase. They're following us, she said. I know, Marcus said calmly. They won't catch us. He was right. Whatever modifications had been made to these vehicles, they were fast. Within 5 minutes, they'd lost their pursuers in the maze of industrial streets. Clara slumped back against the seat, adrenaline draining away and leaving her hollow. Adrian was on his phone, talking to someone, coordinating. When he hung up, he looked at Clara. You disobeyed a direct order. I saved your life. You could have been killed. So could you. They stared at each other, both breathing hard, both too stubborn to back down. Finally, Adrian shook his head. You're the most frustrating woman I've ever met. Good, Clara said. You're the most infuriating man I've ever met. Good. They sat in angry silence for another minute before Adrian spoke again, his voice softer. That was brave, what you did. Stupid, but brave. I learned from the best. I never taught you to attack armed men with construction materials. Some things you have to figure out on your own. Adrian almost smiled. Then he reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. They drove back to the safe house in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Not uncomfortable, just heavy with everything that had happened. When they arrived, Dr. Lin was waiting, looking exhausted and annoyed in equal measure. You tore your stitches, she said to Adrian. I know. And you brought her along, she gestured at Clara. She insisted. Of course she did. Dr. Lin patched them both up, Adrian's torn stitches, Clara's feet that had opened up again during her sprint with the rebar. Neither of them complained. When it was done, the sun was starting to rise. Golden light filtered through the windows, painting everything in shades of amber. Adrian and Clara sat on the couch in the living room, close but not touching, both too exhausted to move. The man we captured, Clara said. What happens to him? He talks. Tells us where Kozlov is planning to go, what his next move is. Then we use that information to end this. And if he doesn't talk? Adrian's expression went cold. He'll talk. Clara should have been disturbed by the certainty in his voice, by the implication of what would make someone talk, but she wasn't. Maybe that made her a terrible person. Or maybe it just made her someone who understood that Adrian's world didn't have room for moral gray areas. What happens now? She asked. Now you rest, properly this time. Then we figure out our next move. I meant with us. Adrian turned to look at her. What about us? You said you wanted me to stay. I said I would. But what does that actually mean? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, It means you move into my place. It means you learn how to handle a weapon because I won't always be there to protect you. It means you accept that sometimes I'll leave in the middle of the night and come back bleeding. It means you trust me to do what I do, while I trust you to be strong enough to handle it. That's a lot. I know. Clara thought about her apartment, her old job, her old life that had felt so important 2 weeks ago and now seemed impossibly small. Okay, she said. Adrian's eyebrows rose. Okay? Okay, I'll move in. I'll learn to shoot. I'll be strong enough. Just like that? Clara smiled. Just like that. Adrian pulled her closer, careful of both their injuries, and kissed her forehead. You're insane. Probably. They sat there as the sun rose, battered and bandaged, and choosing each other despite every logical reason not to. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was real. And real was better. Clara woke up on the couch, disoriented and aching in places she didn't know could ache. Sunlight was streaming through the windows, real sunlight, mid-morning bright, and someone had draped a blanket over her at some point. She sat up slowly, wincing as her bandaged feet protested, and tried to piece together where she was. The safe house. Right. The events of the last 24 hours came flooding back. The wedding, the gunfire, Adrian bleeding, the docks, her attacking an armed man with a piece of rebar like some kind of action movie protagonist who'd lost her mind. She pressed her hands to her face and tried to process the fact that this was her life now. Voices drifted from the kitchen. Clara stood carefully, testing her feet, and limped toward the sound. Adrian was at the counter with Marcus and two other men she vaguely recognized from the convoy. They were hunched over a laptop, talking in low voices, and there was an intensity to the conversation that made Clara pause in the doorway. Marcus saw her first. She's up. Adrian turned and Clara saw the exhaustion etched into his face. He'd changed clothes again, fresh black shirt, jeans, but the bandage above his eyebrow was new, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept at all. You should be resting, he said. So should you. I rested. Liar. The other two men exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the domestic tone this conversation had taken. Adrian dismissed them with a nod. Give us a minute. They filed out, and suddenly it was just Clara, Adrian, and Marcus in the kitchen. Coffee? Marcus offered, already pouring her a cup. Please? She took it gratefully and sat at the counter. Adrian moved to stand beside her, close enough that their arms brushed. What did I miss? Clara asked. Our guest is being cooperative, Marcus said. Gave us everything we needed. Kozlov's planning to leave the country tonight. Private airfield about 40 miles north of here. So you're going after him? We are, Adrian confirmed. When? Few hours. We're waiting for confirmation on the exact timing. Clara set down her coffee cup. I want to come. No, Adrian said immediately. Adrian, no, Clara. Last night was different. You were already there when things went wrong. But this? This is a planned operation, armed confrontation. This is exactly the kind of situation where you stay far away. Why? Because I'm not trained? Because I'll slow you down? Because I can't do what I need to do if I'm worried about you getting shot. Clara turned to face him fully. You're going to be worried about me whether I'm there or sitting in this house. At least if I'm there, I know what's happening. She has a point, Marcus said. Adrian shot him a look. You're not helping. I'm being realistic. She's not going to stay put. We both know it. Better to have her contained where we can see her than wondering if she's going to show up at the worst possible moment. I attacked one guy with rebar and suddenly I'm some kind of loose cannon? Yes, both men said simultaneously. Clara would have laughed if the situation wasn't so serious. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, clearly warring with himself. Finally he said, If, and this is a very big if, you come, you follow every single instruction I give you. You stay with Marcus in a vehicle minimum of 200 yards from the actual site. You wear a vest, you carry a phone with direct contact to our backup team, and at the first sign of trouble, you leave. No arguments, no heroics, you just go. Those are the terms. Agreed. I'm serious, Clara. So am I. He studied her face, looking for doubt or fear or any indication that she didn't fully understand what she was agreeing to. Whatever he found must have satisfied him because he nodded once. Marcus, get her fitted with proper gear, and someone teach her basic handgun safety. I don't need her shooting herself in the foot because she doesn't know how to hold a weapon. On it, Marcus said. Adrian's phone buzzed. He checked it, frowned, then looked at Clara. I need to take this. You good? I'm good. He kissed her forehead, a quick, almost unconscious gesture, and walked out. Clara watched him go, then turned to Marcus. He's going to get himself killed trying to protect everyone, isn't he? Probably, Marcus said. But that's what he does. He carries the weight so other people don't have to. That's not sustainable. No, but it's who he is. Marcus poured himself more coffee and leaned against the counter. You know, when he first told me about this arrangement with you, the fake dating thing, I thought he'd lost his mind. Adrian doesn't do favors for crying girls in bridesmaid dresses. He doesn't play pretend. But then I saw the way he looked at you and I realized it was never about the deal. What was it about? Recognition, maybe. He saw something in you that reminded him of himself. Someone broken who refused to stay broken. Someone who walked into danger because the alternative, staying safe and small, was worse than the risk. Clara absorbed that. Is that why you're letting me come today? Because you think I'm like him? I'm letting you come because Adrian's going to be distracted whether you're there or not. And at least if you're there, he knows where you are. Marcus set down his cup. But also because you've earned it. You didn't run when the shooting started. You didn't panic. You adapted. That's rare. I attacked a guy with rebar because I didn't know what else to do. Exactly. You didn't freeze. You acted. Most people freeze. Clara thought about that while Marcus led her to a back room where someone had assembled what looked like a small armory, vests, weapons, tactical gear laid out with military precision. Over the next hour, a woman named Sarah, ex-military, built like she could bench press a car, taught Clara the absolute basics of handgun operation. How to hold it, how to check if it was loaded, how to aim, how to fire without shooting her own foot off. You're not going to be winning any marksman competitions, Sarah said, but if someone's close and you need to make noise, you can do that. Clara hoped she wouldn't need to make noise. They fitted her with a vest that was heavy and uncomfortable but apparently bulletproof. Sarah adjusted the straps, showed her how to move in it, warned her it would only stop certain calibers, and she shouldn't consider herself invincible. Anything else I should know? Clara asked. Yeah, don't die. Adrian would be insufferable if you died. It was meant as a joke, but it landed with weight. By the time Clara emerged from the back room, it was past noon. Adrian was in the living room with his full team, maybe 15 people total, all armed, all looking focused and dangerous. He was giving final instructions, pointing at a map spread across the coffee table. The private airfield was marked in red, access roads in blue, potential escape routes in yellow. 3 teams, Adrian was saying. Marcus, you've got the north approach. Vincent, south. I'll take primary entry. We box him in, no way out. He surrenders or he doesn't, but either way, he's not making that flight. What about his security? Someone asked. He'll have people, but not as many as he thinks. Half his crew is scattered after last night. The other half is watching the wrong locations. We have surprise. Use it. The team dispersed to their assignments. Adrian looked up and saw Clara standing there in tactical gear, and something complicated crossed his face. He crossed to her. You look ridiculous. Thanks. You look tired. I am tired. Then maybe you should... Don't. Don't ask me to sit this out. This ends today, one way or another. Clara reached up and touched his face, careful of the bandaged cut. I know, just be careful. Please. Careful isn't really my strong suit. I've noticed. He leaned down and kissed her, and it tasted like coffee and exhaustion and desperation. When he pulled back, he pressed his forehead against hers. I mean it, he said quietly. If things go wrong, you run. You don't wait for me. You don't try to help. You just run, and you don't stop until Marcus says it's safe. Adrian, promise me, Clara. She wanted to argue, wanted to say she wouldn't leave him, but the look in his eyes told her this wasn't negotiable. I promise. He kissed her again, then stepped back. Marcus, she's with you. Don't let her do anything stupid. I'll try, Marcus said, but she's got her own ideas about stupid. They moved out in a convoy of 6 vehicles. Clara rode with Marcus and Sarah in an SUV toward the back of the formation. The private airfield was 40 minutes north, tucked into farmland that had probably been cheap to buy and easy to keep off the radar. The sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, painting everything in gold and amber. It would have been beautiful if Clara wasn't terrified about what came next. Marcus drove in silence, focused on the road. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, checking weapons with practiced efficiency. Clara sat in the back, trying to keep her breathing steady, trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. "You doing okay back there?" Marcus asked. "Define okay." "Fair enough." They pulled off the main highway onto a dirt road that wound through fields of nothing. No houses, no witnesses, just empty land and the kind of isolation that was either peaceful or terrifying depending on what you were doing. The airfield came into view about 10 minutes later. A single runway, small hangar, control tower that looked abandoned. A private jet sat on the tarmac, engines already running. "He's here," Marcus said into his radio. "Jet's being prepped. We need to move now." Adrian's voice crackled back. "Copy. Team's in position. Wait for my signal." They parked 200 yards out, just like Adrian said. Clara could see the airfield clearly through the windshield, but wasn't close enough to make out details. Figures were moving around the jet. Security detail, probably. Clara counted at least 6 men, all armed. "Where's Kozlov?" Sarah asked. "Probably inside the hangar," Marcus said. "He won't show himself until the last minute." They waited. The silence was oppressive. Clara could hear her own heartbeat, could feel every second stretching out like hours. Then Adrian's voice over the radio. "Now!" Everything happened at once. Adrian's team converged from 3 directions, moving fast and coordinated. Kozlov's security detail barely had time to react before they were engaged. Clara heard gunfire, sharp cracks echoing across the empty fields. The jet's engines powered up higher, like they were preparing for immediate takeoff. "He's making a run for it," Marcus said. More gunfire. One of Kozlov's men went down. Another dove for cover behind a fuel truck. And then Clara saw him. Viktor Kozlov emerged from the hangar, tall, broad-shouldered, gray hair, expensive suit. He was flanked by 2 bodyguards and moving toward the jet with purpose. Adrian appeared from behind the hangar, cutting off the path. He had his weapon raised, trained on Kozlov. Even from 200 yards away, Clara could read the body language, the standoff, the calculation. "He's not going to surrender," Sarah said quietly. She was right. Kozlov's bodyguards raised their weapons. Adrian's team converged, surrounding them. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Kozlov said something, Clara couldn't hear what, and his bodyguards opened fire. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Adrian's team returned fire with precision, and both bodyguards went down in seconds. Kozlov stood alone, hands raised, finally recognizing he was beaten. Adrian approached, weapons still trained on him. They were talking now. Clara wished she could hear what they were saying. Then movement to the left caught her attention. Another vehicle. Black sedan, coming fast from the opposite direction. It must have been waiting as backup, hanging back until needed. "Marcus," Clara said. "I see it." The sedan screeched to a halt between Kozlov and Adrian's team. Doors flew open and 4 more men emerged, all armed, all firing. Adrian's team scattered for cover. The tactical advantage evaporated in seconds as they were pinned down by crossfire. Kozlov ran for the jet. "No," Clara breathed. She watched as he reached the stairs, started climbing. The jet was already moving, beginning to taxi. Adrian broke from cover, sprinting toward the jet. One of Kozlov's men turned and fired. Adrian went down. Clara's entire world stopped. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, just watched as Adrian lay motionless on the tarmac while the jet picked up speed. "Marcus, we have to—" "Stay in the car, Clara. He's hit. Marcus, I see it. Stay here." Marcus was already out, moving toward the firefight with Sarah right behind him. Clara sat frozen in the back seat, hands pressed to the glass, watching Adrian not move. This couldn't be happening. He couldn't be. Then Adrian rolled, came up on one knee, and fired 3 shots in rapid succession. One hit the jet's front tire. The aircraft lurched, rubber shredding. Another hit the engine, cowling. Sparks flew. The jet tried to take off anyway, but the damaged tire threw it off balance. It veered right, off the runway, into the grass. The nose gear collapsed. The jet was grounded. Adrian was on his feet now, moving toward it despite a visible limp. His team had suppressed most of Kozlov's backup security. Bodies littered the tarmac. The jet's door opened and Kozlov appeared, hands up, finally recognizing this was over. Adrian reached him, weapon trained, and said something Clara still couldn't hear. Kozlov dropped to his knees. It was done. Clara slumped back in her seat, hands shaking, heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Marcus appeared at her window a few minutes later. "You can come out now. It's over." Clara opened the door on legs that didn't feel entirely solid and walked toward the scene. The sun was setting properly now, painting the disabled jet and the scattered bodies in shades of orange and red. Adrian was standing over Kozlov, phone to his ear, talking to someone. Blood stained his jeans, he'd been hit in the leg, but he was upright and conscious and alive. When he saw Clara approaching, he ended the call and limped toward her. They met halfway. "You got shot," Clara said. "Just a graze. You went down. I thought, I know. I'm sorry." Clara hit him. Not hard, just a frustrated slap against his chest. "Don't do that to me. Don't make me watch you die." "I wasn't dying." "You didn't know that." "I had a pretty good idea." She hit him again, and this time he caught her wrist gently. "Hey, I'm okay. We're okay." Clara looked up at him, at the exhaustion, the blood, the relief in his eyes, and something inside her broke open. "I can't do this," she whispered. Adrian's expression shuddered. "What?" "I can't sit in a car 200 yards away and watch you get shot. I can't spend every operation wondering if you're going to come back. I can't—" Her voice cracked. "I can't lose you." "Clara, I know that's what I signed up for. I know this is your world and I said I could handle it. But watching you go down, even for those few seconds, I felt something break inside me and I realized I'm not as strong as I thought I was." Adrian pulled her closer, despite his injuries, despite everything. "Yes, you are." "No, I'm not. I'm terrified, Adrian, all the time. And I don't know how to make that go away." "You don't make it go away," Adrian said quietly. "You just learn to function through it. You think I'm not terrified? Every time I leave you somewhere, every time I walk into a situation that could go wrong, I'm terrified. Of losing you. Of not being fast enough or smart enough or strong enough to keep you safe. But I do it anyway because the alternative, walking away from you, is worse than the fear." Clara looked up at him. Tears she hadn't realized she was crying streaming down her face. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Adrian continued. "It means you're scared and you do it anyway. You walked into the Velvet Room 2 weeks ago, terrified, and asked the most dangerous man in the room for help. You stood beside me at that wedding, even though you knew what I was. You hit a gunman with a piece of rebar because you saw someone you cared about in danger and acted before you could think. That's not weakness, Clara. That's the opposite. Then why does it feel like I'm falling apart? Because you're human, because you care, because for the first time in a long time you have something to lose." He wiped her tears with his thumb. "I'm not going to lie to you. This life, my life, it's dangerous. There will be more situations like this, more risks, more fear, and I can't promise I'll always come home unscathed." That's not reassuring. "But," Adrian continued, "I can promise I'll fight like hell to come home. Every single time. Because what we have, this thing we've built, it matters more than territory or power or winning. You matter more." Clara pressed her forehead against his chest. "When did you get so good with words?" "I'm not. I'm just telling you the truth." Behind them, Marcus was coordinating with local authorities, the legitimate kind who Adrian apparently had relationships with. Kozlov was being loaded into a police vehicle, hands cuffed, empire crumbling. "What happens to him?" Clara asked. "Prison. Long time. His organization will fracture without him. Other people will move in, take over his operations. The cycle continues." "Does it ever end?" "No. But it gets more manageable." Clara pulled back enough to look at Adrian. "What about us? Where do we go from here?" Adrian glanced around at the chaos, the disabled jet, the bodies being covered, his team securing the scene. Then he looked back at Clara. "We go home," he said. "We patch up, we rest, and tomorrow we start figuring out what normal looks like for us." "Do we get a normal?" "We can try." It wasn't a promise of perfection. Wasn't a guarantee of safety or happily ever after or any of the things fairy tales were made of. But it was real. And real was what Clara had asked for 2 weeks ago when she'd walked into that lounge wearing a bridesmaid dress and tears. Real was what Adrian had given her. 3 months later, Clara stood in Adrian's penthouse, their penthouse now, looking out over the city at night. The lights spread out like stars, thousands of lives intersecting and diverging in patterns too complex to track. Behind her, Adrian was on a call with Marcus, discussing some business thing Clara had learned not to ask too many questions about. She'd learned a lot in 3 months: how to handle a weapon properly, how to read a room and know when tension was about to boil over, how to exist in Adrian's world without losing herself in it. She'd also learned that Daniel had moved to Seattle with Vanessa, and they'd lasted about 2 months before imploding spectacularly. Clara felt nothing about it except a vague sense of relief that she'd dodged that particular disaster. Her mother called once a week. Her father had started sending awkward text messages asking if she was eating enough. Emma visited sometimes, wide-eyed and curious about Clara's new life, but smart enough not to ask too many questions. They'd found a rhythm. It wasn't perfect. There were still nights when Adrian left at 2 in the morning and didn't come back until dawn. Still moments when Clara's fear spiked so high she could barely breathe. Still arguments about safety and boundaries and how much danger was acceptable. But there were other moments too. Quiet mornings over coffee. Evenings when Adrian came home early and they cooked dinner together. Nights when they'd lie in bed and talk about nothing and everything until they fell asleep tangled in each other. Clara had found something she'd been missing her entire life without knowing it. Not someone to complete her, because that was fairy tale nonsense, but someone who saw her completely and chose her anyway. Someone who'd taught her that strength wasn't about never being afraid. It was about being afraid and moving forward anyway. Someone who'd shown her that the boldest choices were often the scariest ones, but they were also the ones that mattered most. Adrian finished his call and came to stand beside her at the window. He wrapped an arm around her waist and pulled her close. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How different everything is from 3 months ago." "Good different or bad different?" "Complicated different." Adrian smiled. "That's accurate." They stood in silence for a moment, looking out over the city they'd both claimed in their own ways. "Do you ever regret it?" Adrian asked quietly. "Saying yes that night in the Velvet Room?" Clara thought about it, really thought about it. She thought about the gunfire and the fear and the nights she couldn't sleep because she was worried about him. She thought about how her old life had been safe and predictable and ultimately empty. She thought about learning to stand tall, learning to fight, learning that love wasn't about finding someone perfect, but finding someone worth fighting for. "No," she said finally, "I don't regret it at all. Even though it's hard? Especially because it's hard. Easy things don't change you. Hard things do." Adrian turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her face. "You changed me too, you know." "How?" "I used to think power was about control, about making sure no one could hurt you. But you showed me it's more than that. Real power is being vulnerable with someone and trusting they won't destroy you. It's choosing to protect something beyond yourself. It's believing there's more to life than just survival." Clara's throat tightened. "That's the most romantic thing you've ever said to me." "Don't get used to it. I'm not good at romantic." "You're better than you think." He kissed her, slow and deep, and Clara felt the same spark she'd felt that first night when he'd kissed her as practice, and they'd both known it was anything but. When they pulled apart, Adrian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Clara's heart stopped. "Adrian? It's not what you think," he said quickly. "I mean, it is, but not right now. I'm not proposing. Not yet. I know we're still figuring this out, and I know marriage after 3 months would be insane even by our standards." "Then what is it?" He opened the box. Inside was her grandmother's ring, the sapphire surrounded by tiny pearls, the thin gold band worn smooth by decades of wear. "You gave this to me as payment for a deal," Adrian said. "But the deal is over. We're not pretending anymore, so I'm giving it back. Because it was never mine to keep. It belongs to you, to your history, to the woman who taught you that real love exists and real strength matters." Clara took the ring with shaking hands. "My grandmother wore this every day for 53 years, through good times and terrible ones, through 2 wars and the Depression and more heartbreak than anyone should have to carry. But she never took it off, because my grandfather gave it to her and it meant something. I know. She told me once that love isn't about finding your other half. It's about finding someone who makes you want to be whole on your own and then choosing to build something together anyway. Clara slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it always had. Is that what we're doing? She asked. Building something? I think so, if you want to. Clara looked at the ring, then at Adrian, then out at the city spreading before them like a promise and a threat in equal measure. She thought about the girl who'd walked into the velvet room 3 months ago, crying in a bridesmaid dress, asking a crime boss for help because she was so desperate to stop being broken. That girl was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who'd learned that being broken wasn't the end of the story, just the beginning of a different one. Someone who'd discovered that sometimes the most dangerous choice was also the bravest one. Someone who'd found redemption not through being saved, but through learning to save herself. And someone who'd fallen in love with a man who lived in shadows, but had shown her how to walk in both darkness and light without losing herself to either. Yes, Clara said. I want to build something with you. Adrian smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes and made him look younger. Good, because I'm terrible at construction, but I'm willing to learn. Clara laughed, and it felt like freedom. Outside, the city continued its eternal rhythm. Deals were being made and broken. People were falling in love and falling apart. Lives were intersecting in patterns too complex to predict. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a woman who'd learned to stand tall and a man who'd learned to be vulnerable stood together and chose each other despite every logical reason not to. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't safe. It wasn't the ending Clara had imagined when she'd walked into that lounge asking for help with something as simple as a wedding date. But it was real, and real, Clara had learned, was always better than perfect. Because perfect was a lie you told yourself to avoid the hard work of becoming whole. Real was messy and complicated and terrifying and worth every single second of fear. Real was knowing someone could break your heart and trusting them not to. Real was building something beautiful in the middle of chaos because the alternative was letting the chaos win. Real was love, not the fairy tale kind, not the kind that solved all your problems and made everything easy, but the kind that made you braver, the kind that made you fight harder, the kind that made you believe that maybe, just maybe, broken things could be rebuilt into something even stronger than they were before. And as Clara stood in the penthouse overlooking a city full of shadows and light, her grandmother's ring on her finger and Adrian's hand in hers, she realized that she'd finally found what she'd been searching for all along. Not someone to fix her, not someone to save her, but someone to stand beside her while she fixed and saved herself. And that was worth everything.